Chapter 1: A Drop of Allure. The desert prison on the rocky island of Colorado, ADX, is considered to be the world's most guarded jail, with no one can escaping from it. In the silence of the night, the wind mixed with dust blowing over and over again, the temperature in the desert has reached -5 degrees. No one found that through the dark moonlight, wearing a white tie, a girl deftly threw the wire up to 3.28 meters of wire, quietly go into this prison called Sin Prison. The girl named she merely 19 years old, but already become the fearless gold medal assassin of the dark world. She deployed one drop of poison can destroy a whole city. She flipped the silver needles can live the dead and restored flesh and bones. She was impenetrable defense in ordinary people's eyes. However, she had a little trouble in a game level. An hour later, she passed through the laser on the wall that seemed like knitted net. She finally arrived in front of unremarkable prison door. You really came to save me. The prison door opened. A young handsome man, pleasantly surprised, rushed out to hold her. She felt the man's slightly trembling body and tightly embraced. She chilled heart had a trace of softness. The experience from childhood had made she nature become firm and persistent, icily arrogant. But only this man, Yi, was different for her. The two became partner in the organization to train together, completed the missions together, helping each other through the mountains of daggers and seas of flames. They are not lover. Friendship is more profound than love. She hugged him gently, softly said, "We are partner, you are in danger. How can I not come to save you?" He Yi, hoarse voice trembling, holding her hands but can't relax. "I really want to be with you in this lifetime. Unfortunately," she want to ask unfortunately what? When she felt a sharp pain came from her abdomen. She suddenly pushed Yi, stagger a few steps back. Hard to believe looking at the knife inserted in her abdomen. Look again towards Yi. Why? Under the dim light, Yi complexion becomes sinister. From his mouth emerged out crazy laugh. I blame you. Blame you for not willing to love me. Refuse to accept me as your man. Since I can't get you, it would be better to follow the organization's order to kill you." She's body shaking, looking the man's eyes filled with pain and anger. She has not loved Yi, also rejected his proposal. In her eyes, Yi just a brother, the best partner. However, the two dependencies companionship are all false. Do not love, so must obliterate. And why the organization want to get rid of her? She feel the wound spread open made her limp and numb from suffocated. This dagger had been smeared with poison. This is the blood-sealed throat poison. The organization. Why want to kill me? From Hishi's forehead dripping out bead of sweat, her paled face become more beautiful. "I never thought I have done something unworthy to the organization. In the end, why? Blame that your life isn't good." Yi stepped forward, extended his hand, gently hooked Hishi's lower jaw. At this moment she gave him a kind of gentle and beautiful illusion. Make his coveted heart began to stir. "Shun Master predicted you have the power of curse. One day will bring disaster for the organization, even destroy the world. The organization gave you 3 or 4 times to let you contribute this mysterious power, but you refused to give in. Humph. You say how the organization will allow you to live?" Hishi's body shaking, her whole body as if numb. Just because a prophecy from God stick, so they want to kill her. And so Yi keep on saying that he loved her. How many times she has been saved him in the missions. And this is his payback, cruelly send her to death. In this world, sure enough beside oneself, must not believe anyone. She suddenly pushed away Yi. All of a sudden laughed crazily. "Because feared of me destroying the organization and the world. So want to kill me. In that case, you all open wide your dog eyes to take a good look. My death will bring what kind of disaster to the organization." Her voice faded. She suddenly pulled out the dagger in her abdomen, fiercely stabbed it into her heart. Yi, shocked by her action, found out that she was only suicide, sighed. "Humph, you always unable to differentiate good from bad. If you obey me earlier." Yi words not finished yet. Suddenly her ear ringing a burst of violent explosion sound. Tightly hold on him, she felt the sharp pain as if tearing her body. Her head and 4 limbs as if all split up in pieces, even screams not come out. Then there's no vitality on her. Rumble. The whole prison's base ear-splitting because the explosion sound loudly collapsed into dust. No one knows. Within He-She's body had a space. Her flesh body is the carrier space. Once He-She death, the space will explode 10 kilometers all around. At the same time, He-She's space storaged her handmade poison allure. Along with the explosion quietly mingled in the air, spread to the world. The so-called allure. Just one drop can immediately do the city's living things. This is the real curse and destruction. Chapter 2. The Good Quality Furnace Space-Torn, Galaxy Reversal. In here are Yinjing City's the most famous and outstanding gluttonous house. All kind of sensual pleasures were displayed vividly and thoroughly. In the golden cage there was a thin and weak, trembling little girl. Frightened at the scene before her eyes, she was surrounded by men watching her. I heard this is a good quality furnace, but the appearance not too pleasant to the eyes. The little girl in the cage had pale skin, thin figure, unexpressive gloomy eyes. She can be considered as an unsalted girl. One hand roughly extended into the cage, pulling the little girl's hair, forcing to expose her face. The little girl uttered a painful scream, air sucked between her teeth and wailing. "Who are you? Why are you imprisoned me in the cage?" The men have heard what was said burst into loud laughter. Her voice were pleasant to hear. If shouting on the bed it certainly could melted the soul. Among these people, a man with scar on his face looks ruthless and tyrannical, suddenly bent down pulled over the little girl. The man who hardly have tender feeling for the fairer sex tore up her clothes. His rough hands was ruthlessly pinched her naked, exposed tender skin. TSK, though a bit ugly, but this body actually had soft skin and tender flesh. This father like it. Another person laughed. Old Jiang, however, in your home already had a lot of furnaces. Don't rob us? That's right. The initial price is 1,000 yuan crystals. I would like to raise the bid 1,005. The little girl's eyes filled with fear. These men looking her as if they were appraising an items. Their gaze and action was full of and rough. She screamed, "I am the Nailin Manners, miss, not a slave. You quickly let go of me." The men on the scene become quiet at first. Immediately they burst into loud laughter. This shameless slave actually dared to say she is the Nailin Manners, Mississippi. Every daughters of Nailin Doctor were elegant and dignified, also had awe-inspiring innate talent. Don't say, you lowly slave who had ugly appearance, the waist with blocked meridians, actually dare pretending to be the Nailin Manners, Mississippi. Don't make me laugh. Someone pulling her hair to lifted her up, laughed while tearing her clothes. Let me examine her first whether or not she was the Jade Annulus. Then we decide her price. She could be just a broken flower withered willow. We spend money for a big price to buy her. Isn't her just cheaper to the gluttonous house? Broken flower, withered willow means fallen woman. Once again everyone laughing. No one questioned the man action. Gluttonous house had auctioned every stuff that everyone could thinks. However, there were the premium product, but actually it's just a worthless rubbles. The premium products naturally must be carefully to look after. As for the rubbles, not be able to carry out according to the auction standards. If the guest's interesting, they can feel free to look at it, but if bumped into it nor broken, it also have to compensate with money. Don't touch me. Don't touch me. I am really the Nailin Manners, miss. The little girl's eyes was filled with desperate tears. But no matter how much she's struggling and yelling, these beasts still going to tearing her clothes, publicly humiliate her. Her outer clothes was shredded and her skirt was pulled, revealing some of the little girl's pale skin. Her ears filled with men cruel lust demonically laughter, seems like the beast's fierce fangs. The little girl's faith and self-respect totally destroyed. The golden cage imprisoned her, make her nowhere to go. Instead of being humiliated or sold as a slave, she would rather die. Ah! Dash! Suddenly the little girl hit her head on the cage iron lock. The blood splattered everywhere. The sound of iron lock clanking echoed. Chapter 3. Azura stepped out from hell. There are a split second of silence in the room. Everyone was stunned by the immediate scene. Did she die? Someone opened the cage, dragged her out to probe her breath. Smelly girl. refuse a toast only to be forced to drink a forfeit. Really a bad luck. One of them ruthlessly kicked the little girl's body, unhappily spit out a mouthful of saliva. What a pity. There was only this furnace today. Ruined I. Your father's good mood. Old Jiang, squatting on the ground, touched the little girl's smooth skin to measuring the smoothness, even though she can't match equally to the furnace. But this body's soft skin to be peeled off to make a human skin drum also good. His statement not yet finished, old Jiang's hand on the little girl's body suddenly froze. His pair muddy eyes came in contact with a pair pitch black like hell of phoenix eyes. She didn't die. Someone exclaimed. The next moment, everyone heard old Jiang uttered a miserable howl. Dash. My hand, dash. It appeared old Jiang's hand that originally caressed the little girl's hand now were drooping. His elbow below was flexible as if it didn't have bones. It was actually all the bones was crushed. Everyone stiffened in the place for a moment, stunned, looking at the incomplete, clothed little girl slowly stood up. Obviously just a moment ago such a weakling and crying slave was shivering in the cage, but now she is like a Jura that had stepped out from hell. Her blood on the forehead flowed down was similar to a red poppy in full bloom. Gloomy and cold energy overcast in the air. A dense of mist were diffused inside the room, as if a death god waved down the sickle, make people instinct and feared. You, who are you? The speaking voice barely fall down when suddenly a sharp cold blade flashed through. Soon as a call sounded, there was a person's neck that had been cut off, his eyes wide open, cutting off his breath. You don't come, dash. Quick, call the gluttonous house's guards. In the examination room of the auction products was in a great mess. These people run away frantically, even had forgotten that they themselves is the first-ranked chi refining of the martial arts practitioner. Also had forgotten the fact that a moment ago, that slave who was timidly and trembling inside the cage was their responsibility that they bullied and humiliated. However, is there someone who can escape from the death god's sickle? No one. Everyone feel a burst of piercing cold wind swept past them. There's no enough time to react. Suddenly came an intense pain in their neck. In a blink of an eye, they all lose consciousness. In 10 breaths, merely just 10 short breaths, and this room was already filled with dead peoples, a noiseless scenario. The little girl's barefooting, stepped on among one dead body, icy cold expression and gloomy eyes, whispering, "Still needed 1,000 of year to harm me. She has lived once again." Gluttonous house of the Yanjing city. There was a weak and pitiful slave who had been bullied and humiliated until died. Once again opened her eyes, already become the gold medal assassin of the 21st century, she. The moment she crossed over, she got the former's memory. The former of this body was called Nalen she. Coincidentally, they have the same name. However, the former's life so much different from she. Nalen she was born in the kingdom that respected the martial force and cultivator of the Jinling kingdom. Her father is the world-famous doctor, but she is the trash with crippled spiritual root. Don't mention she had cultivation technique. She even hadn't learned any medical innate talent. Nalen she birth mother died after giving birth to her. When she was child, her stepmother assigned her to the separated shabby courtyard to emerge and perish on her own. The evil slaves in the separated courtyard saw her as had no authority and power, also the trash. Thus they deducted her food and clothes expenses, even often abused her, so she be inferior with the slaves. But even has been like this, people in the Nalen family never let her off. Chapter 4. Auction product naturally should be sold off. Nalen she was repeatedly hit by someone until she passed out and was sold to gluttonous house. Before losing consciousness, she vaguely heard a vicious voice. "Don't blame me. If want to blame someone, then just blame yourself for being trash. You even dared to block the second Mrs. path." Nalen she's appearance was quite ordinary, and she was the good-for-nothing miss who can't cultivate. She could only be bought by gluttonous house to be sold as a low-grade furnace. Before the auction, she was humiliated by some vulgar and low-rank martial arts practitioners, and in the end she was unable to endure it and killed herself in the cage. When her eyes next opened, the soul that occupied this weak body was no longer Nalen she, Rather, it's the assassin that has come back from hell. She looked at the corpses on the ground. Her eyes didn't reveal a trace of emotion. Any slags who dared to provoke her would be damned. She would not show any mercy. Suddenly, she lifted up her head and gazed towards the back of the room. The corner of her mouth hooked into a cold smile. Immediately, she turned around and walked towards the entrance door. However, after only taking 2 steps, her expression suddenly changed. Her beautiful phoenix eyes burst forth with a cold and blade-like aura. Damn it, Dash. I've been tricked by someone, Dash. Hishi's mind was just flashing this thought when a tumph sound could be heard, and she fainted to the ground. Dim light shined onto the examination room gate. 2 tall figures slowly walked towards the unconscious Hishi. One of them looked at the room that was filled with corpses and could help but be speechless. Who could have thought that such an unremarkable little girl could unexpectedly be so ruthless? Not even one person was spared. The other person's face was hidden in the shadows, making it impossible to clearly define the appearance. The whole body emitted an imposing aura warning people to be terrified. He looked down, seemingly as if engrossed with watching the unconscious little girl on the ground. His eyes showed interest and a ruthlessness while looking at her as if she were a rare prey. But when this girl was killing people, I didn't feel any spiritual fluctuation. I don't know what kind of secret method she used. Master, what should we do with her? The man's head slowly lifted as he raised his eyes to look at the other person. Indifferently, he replied, Wu Yu, she is Gluttonous House's auction product. Since she is an auction product, naturally she should be sold off. You still require me to teach you this point? Wu Yu's heart trembled in fear. Quickly bowing, he said, Wu Yu understands. I will give her a strengthened slavery control and put the mysterious iron lock directly around her body, so she has no way to escape. I believe that such an exceptionally good quality furnace will certainly be able to fetch a good price. The man who was being called Master slightly hooked up the corner of his mouth. His eyes were filled with an overflowing interest. I'm looking forward to it. Finished speaking, he faintly swept a glance towards the little girl on the ground, then rapidly disappeared from that place. At this moment, it's already midnight. The city gate has been closed. Not a sound could be heard. Only Gluttonous House was still lit up brightly. The next item is the finale for this auction. The host, who was wearing magnificent gold-colored clothes, clapped his hands. Soon, a huge golden cage dropped down from the sky. At the same time, a brilliant golden light pointed towards the middle of the stage. Suddenly, everyone at the auction caused an uproar. As it turns out, what was placed in the cage was not a goods. Rather, it's a living person. It could be seen that the person was a little girl no more than 17 years old. Pale skin, thin figure, and completely lacking in attractiveness. At this time, her eyes were tightly closed. Her thin hands and feet were bound together with a cold iron chain with a heavy silver lock, while she lay motionless in the middle of the cage. After the little girl in the cage was clearly seen, everyone present suddenly sounded a hissing noise. We are participating in the auction for the premium product. Gluttonous House has received 1,000 yuan for 1 ticket from us. How could you use such inferior goods to flatter us? Chapter 5. I will let you become my 9th concubine. Resentful sounds could be heard coming from the audience. However, on stage, the host acted as if he couldn't hear anything. With a professional smile fixed in place, he used his deep and low voice to slowly say, Item number 16, born as a slave in the year of the snake, in the 54th year, in the 10th month during wave 1, 16 years old. After testing has been found to have no cultivation base 2. As the spiritual root was crippled, a body with a pure yin constitution. The reserve price is set at 10,000 yuan crystals. The host's statement made everyone that was originally noisy suddenly become quiet. Immediately after, a more heated discussion broke out. Heavens, so it turns out that she's of a pure yin constitution. How could you say that it's not an exceptionally good furnace? Gluttonous House absolutely wouldn't cheat us. It's no wonder that she's become tonight's finale product. As long as I were to have her, my long delay with being stuck in a bottleneck will definitely be able to have a breakthrough. I put down an offer of 100,000 yuan crystals, 200,000 yuan crystals, 500,000. Spectators were shocked at the scene of the martial practitioners bidding on the pure furnace like mad devils, all after a rare treasure. No one noticed that the little girl in the golden cage had started to frown from pain as she slowly opened her eyes. That pair of unremarkable phoenix eyes had suddenly become dazzling like pearls, bright with intelligence as they coldly swept over the noisy crowd. At this time, someone amongst the crowd shouted, 10 million yuan crystals. Tonight this woman will become mine. This young master's. Hearing this statement, the guests suddenly became quiet. From the audience seating, a fat man could be seen to slowly stand up. His smug face smiled proudly while walking towards the golden cage. The dazzling light that had been shining on the stage suddenly shot towards his body. The man was at most 6 feet tall with tiny eyes that almost couldn't be seen on his fierce-looking face. His belly protruded out further than an ante's chest, and when he walked his fat body could be seen to jiggle and shake, making people feel disgusted when they saw this. But who would dare laugh at him? After he made that bid, no one even thought to compete with him. The man's name was Zhu Zhongba. He was the eldest son of the richest man in all of Jinling, Zhu Yikun. In this Jinling kingdom that respected military force, merchant families were always being looked down upon by people, but the Zhu family was different. To advance a rank, a martial practitioner's cultivation was inevitably linked to yuan crystals, and so the Zhu family had focused on collecting yuan crystals to build up their career. Under their hands they controlled several mines. They also had connections with the royal family. There were plenty of people who wanted to covet the wealth of the Zhu family, but they didn't dare to. Zhu Zhongba is known as a famous idiot in Yinjing City, but he's also known as the local tyrant. After all, even if the Zhu family lacked something, the one thing they never lacked were yuan crystals. Young Master Zhu, congratulations on winning this pure constitution furnace. Your advanced rank is just around the corner. Young Master Zhu's cultivation will soon have a breakthrough. Make sure to remember to invite us out for a drink to celebrate. Everyone's compliments with envious tones made Zhu Zhongba become more smug and conceited, his watermelon-like belly swaying with pride. Not waiting until the auction finished, he strutted to the stage to stand in front of the host. Wu Yu, quickly hand the slave's ownership card to this young master. I want to bring her home first. I will send over the yuan crystals later. Normally the rules of the auction were that you would pay for the product first, before you could take it home. But this host called Wu Yu didn't seem like he minded, straightforwardly handing over the slave ownership card into Zhu Zhongba's hand. No one could see his eyes flash as he let a trace of a meaningful smile show. Young Master Zhu, the slave's ownership card has now been handed over to you. The auction product officially belongs to you. Once a product is sold, from now on till later, Gluttonous House will have no relationship with that product. However, Zhu Zhongba didn't care what he said. He took the slave ownership card and rushed towards Hishi in the cage. Little lady, I'm coming. As long as you let me advance to the foundation establishment stage, I'm willing to let you become my 9th concubine. Chapter 6. The invisible and shadowless King Yama controls life. The cage had just opened when suddenly the fat pervert was curled up on the ground. The girl's eyes had been tightly closed when he felt something roughly hit his chest. Zhongba's hands had reached out to touch the little girl's clothes. He was just about to feel the flower before him when in the blink of an eye, he flew out of the cage screaming. After being kicked with all her strength, Zhu Zhongba's body that was like a round bucket rolled back a few spins, making one want to prostrate themselves in admiration, before he fell from the stage whence a painful howl was heard. This unforeseen event happened suddenly, stunning everyone present frozen and causing a deathly silence to envelope the room. Even the always leisurely smiling Wu Yu's eyes flashed with a somewhat bewildered and confused light. They all stared blankly at the unremarkable little girl in the cage, who slowly stood up. The chains that had originally bound her hands and feet were nowhere to be seen, and uninjured she exited from the cage. Her slim figure and pale complexion were unremarkable, but her pair of endlessly dark, ice-cold eyes that swept across the stage made people's souls shiver. She rubbed her wrists that had red spots left from the chain, towering over the fat man that looked like a toad lying on the ground. She sneeringly said, "You want to use this great ant for your own advantages? Think again about whether you have that ability." The little girl's sharp and clear voice was pleasant to hear, just like jade pounding on a transparent glazed roof tile, making people startle awake. Heavens, how did she escape from the cage? She was bound by the casting cold iron chain. An ordinary person simply cannot break it. However, young Master Zhu's cultivation base is at the peak of the qi refining stage. How could he have gotten beaten to the ground by a slave with a crippled spiritual root? Just recently, I clearly didn't felt any spiritual power coming out from her. So how can she kick young Master Zhu so hard? Shocked debates sounded one after another. Everyone's eyes that looked at the little girl stared at her like she was a monster. At this time, Zhu Zhongba's guards finally returned to their senses and hurriedly rushed to help their young master get up. Zhu Zhongba angrily shouted, "You're all a group of trash. What are you doing still standing here? Quickly catch that smelly girl for this, father. I will teach her a lesson when we get back." The 4 guards rushed to surrounded the thin and weak little girl in a circle. The coming fight scene had almost no suspense. It would be easy to slaughter this slave on the stage. This scene is what everyone was predicting in their minds. Even though this odd little girl had some skill, but these guards' cultivation base were at the early stages of the foundation establishment stage. In the Mi Luo continent, martial artist ranks divided into Qi refining stage, foundation establishment stage, meridian stage, gold core stage, nascent soul stage, divine stage, void and darkness stage, overcoming tribulation stage, completeness stage. Everyone that gazed towards he/she had eyes filled with pity, but they still showed excitement at the thought of the good show that was about to begin. The corner of he/she's mouth curled up into a demonically evil smile. Calmly and unhurriedly, she raised her hands. The stage lighting was very bright. Therefore, no one could see that between her 5 slender fingers, she had placed 4 sparkling and translucent silver needles. The invisible needles looked like fine and weak hair strands, but were made from a steel so hard and tough that they could immediately penetrate the body, piercing the bones. When she had awoken the first time, she had found that the exploding space in her previous life not only didn't disappear, instead the invisible needles that she had previously stored in her space were also undamaged. The invisible and shadowless King Yama controls life. This weapon was the best to murder people. The 4 guards respectively took out their flying swords, a low-rank cultivation sword. They grimly and fiercely gazed towards the little girl. In martial artist size, ordinary people were the same as ants. As trash, they only had the qualification to work extremely hard. After the 4 people had transferred the spiritual power within their bodies, the flying sword shot forward to attack the little girl, when she suddenly moved. Chapter 7. Slave Ownership Card. Slave imprint. The invisible needles in her hand flew as if struck by lightning, accurately and quietly piercing into the 4 guards' sea of qi acupuncture point. The flying swords in the hands of the 4 guards suddenly halted in mid-air. Followed by a bang sound, they fell to the ground. The 4 guards' faces filled with shock and disbelief, staring blankly at the faintly sneering little girl on the stage. Suddenly, the one of them screamed, "Why can't I use my spiritual power? Evil woman, what did you do to us?" She laughed lightly as she leaped into the air. Raising her foot, she ruthlessly kicked the 4 guards who had lost their spiritual power. Under the bright lights directed onto the stage, the slender and petite little girl mockingly looked at everyone surrounding her as she towered over them. Around her were the foundation establishment stage cultivators that were all howling and groaning. Furthermore, there was also Zhu Zhongba that had been so scared of her. He had tumbled to the ground to land hard on his buttocks. This scene was simply too shocking and weird. Obviously, this thin and weak little girl seemed like a queen inspecting her territory, making a person's heart tremble in fear but also long to worship her. Zhu Zhongba's frightened face looked at the little girl standing not too far from where he had fallen. Originally, he had gotten up after first being knocked down by her, but after his guards had been defeated by a little girl, he had collapsed to the ground with shock and fear. He saw she start to walk towards him and screamed repeatedly. Rushing over to hold Wu Yu's hand, he yelled, "Save me! Save me! That slut in your gluttonous house has caused me such trouble, yet you don't care? I'm your guest. As long as you help me to subdue her, However many yuan crystals you want, I'll give them all to you. Wu Yu remained calm and collected while he separated their hands, his eyes overflowing with interest as looked at He leisurely said, Young Master Zhu, I already said earlier, once the product is sold, Gluttonous House will not have any responsibility. From the moment I handed over the slave ownership card to you, this product no longer had anything to do with Gluttonous House. Wu Yu's words make Zhu Zhongba's mind go blank for a minute. Then suddenly his face filled with an ecstatic light. He activated his spiritual power, condensing it into a small point to frantically pour it into the slave ownership card while nervously murmuring, Loathsome lady, you are dead. You dare to attack me. This time you're dead for sure. The moment Zhu Zhongba started to pour his spiritual power into the slave ownership card, she had felt a burst of pain in her head, like being pricked with needles. This feeling of pain was very familiar. When she was at the entrance of the examination room, it had been due to feeling this pain that she had lost consciousness. Damn it, dash. So this is the slave imprint. It's turned out that my body was given a strengthened slave control. Ishi's eyes turned cold, exposing her anger, and with lightning speed, she started running away to find a way out. She want to leave. Leave this place right away. Even if she had to die, she absolutely refused to become a slave. Becoming docile and obedient to please others was an insult to her. But she hadn't even managed to run 5 meters away when the pain in her head suddenly intensified. No longer able to withstand the pain in her head, she felt her body fall towards the ground, once again powerless to stop from losing consciousness. Zhu Zhongba held the slave ownership card tightly in his fist as he very carefully walked step by step towards He, intending to confirm if she really was unconscious. When there was no resistance from he let out an insolent laugh. Loathsome lady, let's see how you can still be cocky. His foot fiercely kicked Hishi's body. Dared to attack this father. You simply don't want to live. I will let you know that if you dare to disobey this young master, your future will be miserable. At this time, those knocked-down guards finally managed stand. Their sealed dantions had now restored to usual. It was no longer a situation where they were unable to use their spiritual power. Their faces revealed relieved expressions, but when they looked at the unconscious He on the ground, their eyes flashed with fear and bitter resentment. Zhu Zhongba, with a face full of pride, waved a hand saying, You cannot even deal with this loathsome lady, still needing this father to take care of her. Shut her in the cage and carry it to go back. If there are any mistakes, see how I will deal with you. While repeatedly answering yes, the guards roughly carried the unconscious He and threw her into the cage, like an animal bought at the marketplace. Swaying with the weight of the cage they carried, they left the stage. Chapter 8. The resplendent purple eyes. At the same time, in Gluttonous House's private room, a tall man languidly laid on a couch. His gaze rested on the screen not far in front of him. His expression was elegant while his eyes were filled with a proud indifference. The screen displayed a clear scene of everything that was happening with the auction. There was a thin and weak little girl shut in a cage by several large men. Thick iron chains firmly bound her hands and feet. The man held a wine cup in his hand a moment before suddenly swallowing the wine in one gulp, lightly sighing. What a pity, such an interesting little thing, to have the fate of being defiled by a pig. The guard that was standing silently in the corner of the room couldn't help but quietly glance at him. This is the first time that Master has shown an interest in a woman, but it's only a very small interest, nothing more. As the guard was thinking this, the man's expression suddenly changed. Rising slightly to get up, his gaze fixed on the screen. It clearly displayed the imprisoned little girl's face. Pale skin, thin face, young and inexperienced facial features. In a split second, that pair of tightly closed eyes opened. Her eyelashes shook slightly and a coldness seemed to radiate outwards. The man's sword-like eyebrows knitted, his gaze fixed on the little girl's eyes. Black eyes with the depth of an ancient well, as if they carried long hidden secrets, faintly shone with a purple radiance, so bright and dazzling, that in an instant they had captured his attention and made his chest feel an unfamiliar throbbing. Little thing, who are you exactly? How can there be? He spoke softly, looking at the little girl on the screen with an unbridled interest. Like a beast that had suddenly found the prey that it had been searching for, the anticipation of a future victory made his eyes shine with excitement. Immediately, the man's eyes swept over Zhu Zhongba and the guards that carried the cage. The corner of his mouth curled up into a disgusted sneer. Continuing to face the screen, he murmured faintly, "Follow them." To anyone watching, it would seem as if the man staring intently at the screen was the only person in the room. Shockingly, though, a deep voice responded, originating from the guard hiding his presence in the corner of the room. "Yes, Your Highness." Pausing, the voice suddenly asked, "If Zhu Zhongba uses violence, did this subordinate need to dispose of him?" "Ah," the man chuckled, his voice full of magnetism, extremely pleasant to listen to yet full of contempt. Based on a useless person like him, it would amount to himself heading down a path filled with disaster. This subordinate understands. As the room quickly returned to its previous quietness, the man slowly got up. The corner of his mouth revealed a relaxed and captivating smile. When she woke up again, she was in a bumpy carriage. She was still imprisoned inside the cage. Her entire body, hands, and feet were tied together with finger-width iron chains. Because of the placement of the cage, her visibility was limited, but she could still smell a strong odor nearby. She bit into her lower lip to make her muddled consciousness more clear-headed. The effect of the slave restriction spell was quite strong. The whole journey her consciousness wavered between sober and dazed, causing her mind to repeatedly wander, until the time she completely sobered up. Suddenly the guard's conversation reached her ears. "In the end, who is that slave? Why didn't her body show any signs of using spiritual power, but was still able to seal our cultivation base? Who cares who she is? As long as young master has the slave ownership card in his hands, just wait until we arrive at Zhu Manor. Someone will be found to carve a real slave soul seal on her. At that time the young master can use her however he wants to, and it wouldn't matter." Humph! This loathsome lady is merely an ordinary person, but she dared to make us lose face in such a public place. This father, is itching to pull her skin now. Chapter 9. Slave Restriction Spell, but so? Recalling the terrible memories caused the four guards to get really angry, and when they glanced at the unconscious she in the dim corner, their expressions turned extremely dark. One of them suddenly laughed demonically, saying, "There will come a day when the furnace's usefulness will be exhausted. Just wait until she doesn't have any value left. Will the young master still care about her then? At that time, we can let her experience the taste of wanting to die but being unable to." The four people complacently laughed heartily at their conversation's content. The originally depressed mood swept away. She had her eyes closed to feign sleep. However, behind those closed eyes flashed a trace of killing intent. Those slags, she will absolutely not let them off. She slightly moved her fingers and several invisible needles suddenly appeared in her hand. Using the guard's laughter to cover up any sound, her body issued a slight crackling noise. In a blink, she twisted and reduced the size of her wrist bones, effortlessly breaking free from the iron chains that bound her. This type of skill to reduce a bone's size, while the effect was useful, when practiced it was more of a one-time trick, as to use it she had to bear an inhumane pain. Moreover, she could only maintain it for a few short seconds, so only a monster like she could endure it. Because of the pain, her complexion became pale. She lightly placed a slim finger on a vein on her wrist. Sure enough, it's the brain domain restriction spell. The corner of she's mouth lifted into a self-confident smile. Her guess was true. The so-called slave restriction spell used spiritual power inserted into the nerves of an ordinary person's brain domain, locking the person's ability to be able to control their body normally. The slave ownership card was the key to activate this lock. It's the same as how Tang Sang used the band tightening spell to control Sun Wukong. Once the spiritual power was poured into the slave ownership card, it locked the brain's domain nerve of spiritual power. At the same time, it blocked the ability to recover, oppressing the human brain, causing it to be unable to resist pain. This type of simple restriction spell was useless on a martial artist who possessed spiritual power, But to an ordinary person, it's as if they were at the edge of a sword, simply unable to resist. What a pity that today they ran into her, she. One must know that in her previous life, when in the organization, apart from achieving peak medical expertise and poison techniques, she had also mastered something that made people fear her. It was mind control. She only needed to insert a small invisible needle into an enemy's brain to cause them to become completely powerless and unable to resist her commands, making them wish for death. This insignificant brain domain restriction spell, when compared to her, was only a minor accomplishment. The invisible needles were rapidly and accurately inserted by He-She into her brain. A strange chilliness, along with an intense burst of pain, was felt in He-She's head. She clenched her teeth to prevent her groan being heard by the guards in the carriage. This pain lasted a full 3.5 minutes. He-She felt the original drowsiness in her mind suddenly leave. Her thoughts became clearer and her eyes shone brighter. She felt extremely relaxed yet energized. As He-She pulled the invisible needles out, she happened to see that attached to the top of the 3 needles there was a layer of faint blue light. Her cold breath quietly exhaled in the dimly lit corner of the carriage. So this is the restriction spell filled with spiritual power that had been planted into her brain. Suddenly the carriage started to shake, followed by a creak sound before it stopped moving. They had arrived at Zhu Manor. She didn't have much time to think. Very quickly she threw the invisible needles with the restriction spell still attached into her space. Using the iron chain, she tied her hands and feet, closed her eyes, and pretended to be unconscious. The golden cage that was carried down from the carriage by the guards contained a messily clothed, unconscious little girl. Zhu Zhongba waved his hand as he said, "Carry her to my room. Tell Uncle Guan to prepare some good pills. Tonight this young master shall be promoted from a cultivation base to the foundation establishment stage." His gaze swept over He-She, his eyes flickering with excitement. "Wait until I successfully advance to the foundation establishment stage and return to Zhu family. It will make father shocked. See if he can still scold me as a useless person then." 1. The Monk and Monkey King character in Journey to the West. Chapter 10. You dead fat pig. Just dream on for your entire life. As it turns out, they weren't at the main Zhu Manor. Rather, it was the Zhu family's other courtyard. Here was where Zhu Zhongba's personal courtyard was located. Usually he brought women from good families that he forcefully snatched, and where he lived a life of dissipation. 1. Very quickly the cage was brought to Zhu Zhongba's room. The little girl was carried out from the cage and thrown onto the soft bed. Of course her hands and feet were still tied by iron chains, so there was no danger. "You all go out. No one is allowed to come in and bother me." Zhu Zhongba waited until everyone had completely left the room before a sordid smile spread across his face and he climbed onto the bed. "If it were not for you having a body of pure een, how could this young master touch an ugly person like you?" There was room lit using night pearls for illumination. Specks of light softly landed on the little girl's face. An oval face, long and shapely eyebrows, a beautiful small nose, exquisite red lips, long eyelashes that slightly fluttered, and a fine chest that slightly moved up and down with each breath. The dim light had weakened the little girl's pale skin and the sallow dark circles under her eyes, making her look delicate and beautiful. Unexpectedly, the dimly lit room could make her look like an exceptional beauty. Zhu Zhongba swallowed the saliva pooling in his mouth. His heart wildly beat like a drum, and all the blood in his body rushed forth to the lower part. "I didn't pay much attention before, but she's a little beauty." With his saliva starting to pool again, his fat paws reached out to grope the little girl's chest. "Little beauty, don't worry. This young master will soon let you experience the taste of being in 7th heaven. Dash." Zhu Zhongba's hands had not yet touched the little girl's clothes when he was already flying in the air, landing heavily on the ground. This time being thrown had made him confused and dizzy. His mind was buzzing. For half a day he couldn't get up. She leisurely sat up on the bed, the thick iron chains scattered around her. Obviously the iron chains couldn't hold her. Zhu Zhongba's shaking finger pointed at her. With a trembling voice he said, "You? How can you break free from the iron chains?" She stepped forward, her face revealing a dark and cold smile. "Young Master Zhu really isn't clever. I broke free from the iron chains in the auction, so how could it be that I can't break free a second time? You think changing the iron chains with thicker ones can keep me chained? You! Don't you come near me. Zhu Zhongba used his hands and feet to crawl backwards. Suddenly he remembered something. Quickly pulling out the slave ownership card and holding it in his hand, he frantically poured his spiritual power into it. She immediately held her head. A painful expression appeared on her face as she fell back on the bed. Zhu Zhongba's heart calmed, and he burst into loud laughter while struggling to get up from the ground. I advise you that it would be a smart decision to obediently listen to this young master's words. If you serve me properly, you can suffer less. Even if this woman went on a rampage again and was difficult to deal with, as long as he had the slave ownership card in his hand, she not only had to be obedient, but it could also make her move back and forth with every order he gave her. Moreover, if this aloof and remote woman wasn't afraid to approach him, bullying her would make him very comfortable. Zhu Zhongba's eyes flashed with excitement as an excessively demonic appearance formed on his face. Holding the slave ownership card while swaggering forward, he raised his chin. You still haven't quickly come over to undress this young master. If you provoke this young master again, there will only be more suffering for you. Hishi's body had half curled up from pain, and she was shivering slightly. When she heard Zhu Zhongba's words, she was silent for a long time. Slowly, she extended her hand to grab Zhu Zhongba's neck. So long as you listen obediently, this young master will not treat you unfairly. Is that right? You want me to be obedient? She suddenly lifted up her head. Her evil and cold smile came in contact with Zhu Zhongba's eyes. You dead fat pig, just dream on for your entire life. She had barely finished speaking when she had already raised her foot and ruthlessly kicked Zhu Zhongba to fly off his feet. 1. Dining, drinking, whoring, and gambling. Chapter 11. Rest assured, I will not kill you, dash. Zhu Zhongba screamed as he flew backwards, sounding like a pig being slaughtered. He frantically retreated and took out a whip from inside his storage ring. Completely lacking in coordination and skill, he faced Hishi while still disoriented. Hishi's stature was very nimble, so she certainly wasn't going to get an injury from the whip. However, from the top of the whip a dark and cold aura could be felt, rousing her interest. She dodged to the side, her action too fast to follow. Grabbing the whip, she faced the fat Zhu Zhongba as she firmly tugged several times on the whip. Zhu Zhongba screamed as the whip was tugged on repeatedly, scared witless, until finally his screaming voice became too hoarse to be heard. She saw Zhu Zhongba's sorry figure that was unceasingly rolling on the ground and sneered. Indeed, this is a good whip. It's wasted being owned by you, though. If her guess was right, it was made using a type of animal bone, clear white, tough yet soft. The barb on top of the whip could freely stretch. She really picked up a treasure. On the other side, Zhu Zhongba's miserable howling had finally attracted the guards from outside to come in. The first ones to arrive, sure enough, were those 4 Foundation Establishment stage martial artist guards. The corner of Hishi's mouth raised. In her hands there were already well-prepared invisible needles. Suddenly they flew from her hands towards the guards like falling rain. Ah, dash! My spiritual power. Why can't I use my spiritual power? You evil woman! What underhanded trick did you use on us again? The martial artists from the entire courtyard had gathered here, so the invisible needles had sealed not only the 4 Foundation Establishment stage guards, but also the large party of Qi refining stage martial artists Dantian, rendering them unable to use their spiritual power. After that, Hishi's hands slightly trembled and a faint fragrance permeated the air. Still feeling indignant at the injustice of losing their spiritual power, the guards suddenly felt themselves weaken. Powerlessly, they collapsed to the ground. At this moment, they couldn't resist. They didn't even have the ability to shout for help. She picked up the slave ownership card that had fallen to the ground and put it in her space, then lightly stepping forward, the corner of her mouth curved into a sinister and secretive smile. Zhu Zhongba's fat face looked like a pig head, swollen with purple bruises and crisscrossed with red whip marks. His eyes were extremely frightened. Young lady, brave woman, great aunt, I was wrong. I was wrong. Please don't kill me. He squatted down and lightly patted the tragic sight of Zhu Zhongba's fat pig face. I had said you were a dead fat pig, so if you had paid attention, why would you still not behave? This great aunt's small advantage, just because you want it you think you can have it? I wouldn't dare, woo woo woo, I wouldn't dare anymore. He who felt disgusted, just looking at the weeping form of Zhu Zhongba dripping mucus and tears sneered, unfortunately it's too late. You've been provoking this great aunt, and want to escape unscathed just like that? Dream on. She, sick of the weeping Zhu Zhongba, kicked him until he fainted, then proceeded to drag over those 4 guards that seemed like dead pigs. Didn't you say you wanted me to taste the experience of wanting to die but being unable to? The arrogance in the little girl's smile filled with demonic laughter. Her cold eyes flashed a ruthlessness, making them terrified. Do you know who are we? Among them, one guard that appeared fierce but was actually cowardly at heart spoke. We are people from Jinling Kingdom's richest Zhu family. If you touch young Master Zhu and us, you will stand as Zhu family's enemy. You're not too difficult to deal with. You're merely an ordinary person. If we had detected it a moment ago, we wouldn't have been trapped by your evil trick. Zhu family has countless martial artists. At that time, a tiny individual with no power like you wouldn't be able to step on us as you wish. You should just let us go. If not, you will have to face with the rest of us. The 4 guard words were filled with threats and implications of despising an ordinary person like herself. She laughed angrily. This group of incompetent slags, apart from relying on their martial artist identities to bully others, what else can they do? Her quiet voice that reached their ears was bitingly cold. Like a whisper from hell. Rest assured, I will not kill you. Chapter 12. Kindness will be repaid. Wrongs must be avenged. Having heard what she said made the 4 guards relax. They looked at she's eyes with extreme disdain. Humph. You know your worth. It's good that you know you don't have the qualifications to against the Zhu family. Release us immediately. Perhaps our master and his family will let you off. She ignored them and continued with what she had been about to say. Killing all of you is simply too cheap for you. Since you look down upon ordinary people so much in your lifetime, you should properly experience feeling like an ordinary person. Finished speaking, the invisible needles in her hands suddenly flew. This time the invisible needles did not shoot towards the acupuncture point to seal their dantian. Rather, it was towards their central dantian sea of qi. Their ears seemed to hear a soft qi sound. The next moment, intense spiritual energy flashed throughout the air. Mournful sounds were suddenly heard. Like the wailing of ghosts and the howling of wolves, the screams resonated through the sky. The bodies of the 4 guards suddenly felt as though they had been broken. Their spiritual power was unable to be stored anymore. Throughout the 4 limbs of their body and bones, every inch of their meridians and flesh no longer carried any spiritual power. In the blink of an eye, they could no longer feel the pulse of their dantian. They couldn't even feel any activity in their spiritual energy. And so their complexions, the speed completely visible to the naked eye, rapidly aged. Just a few short breaths and they changed from their 30s, in the prime of life, into 50 to 60-year-old men. Having their dantian broken caused the spiritual energy to dissipate. Their cultivation base disappeared in a flash. A person's dantian was hidden in the body. Their spiritual power was like a shelter for it. Being able to destroy a person's dantian, for that to happen is very near impossible. However, with she relying on her formidable needle technique and her understanding of the human body structure, she can easily accomplish it. From now on till forever, these 4 guards would no longer be able to cultivate, unable to advance their cultivation stage. They will become the most despised, an ordinary person, a group of incompetent old men. On the side, there were guards with cultivation bases at the qi refining stage, watching and scared, as quiet as a cicada in winter, their entire bodies trembling. She glanced at them and faintly said, "With a debt of gratitude, I have always used kindness to repay kindness, but enemies will be repaid with revenge. They messed with me, so this is their fate. You and I do not to have grievances or any hatred. Naturally, I will not make a move on all of you. When this was heard, everyone immediately exhaled a long breath. Their heart relaxed. The next minute, each and every one of them began to close their eyes and pretend to sleep. Even when she started dragging out Zhu Zhongba and those 4 guards, they also pretended not to see anything. This must be a joke. If the master of the Zhu family were to punish them, that is a small matter. If they provoked this great ant, they would end up with a crippled cultivation base. Then in this lifetime, they can consider to be finished. Therefore, young Master Zhu, you have no other choice than to seek good fortune for yourself. At this time, the young Master Zhu that was being pitied by everyone looked like a dead pig as he was dragged to the courtyard of Welcoming Hall. When she tied him to a pillar, the swollen pig-headed face of young Master Zhu slowly started to awaken. You, what are you doing? Zhu Zhongba's eyes opened wide. His entire body was in pain, like someone had separated his muscles from the bones. But he was unable to do anything because suddenly, before his eyes, Heishi's demonic smile once again appeared on her face. This type of psychological attack caused his mind to shut down, breaking his spirit. Not waiting for Zhu Zhongba to speak, Heishi took out 3 invisible needles. With a flick of her hand, she threw them at Zhu Zhongba's body. Zhu Zhongba could feel the meridians in his body become sluggish. His dantian felt like it was sealed. No longer was he able to use spiritual power. Of course, this kind of sealing the meridians and dantian was different to becoming permanently crippled. It was merely causing the cultivation base to be sealed for a short time. This time she had used 3 invisible needles, so that the Zhu Zhongba that had a cultivation base on the qi refining stage. For a short time, he couldn't use spiritual power internally. Immediately after that, she took out several needles attached with the slave restriction spell, ruthlessly inserting them into Zhu Zhongba's brain. The invisible needles instantly disappeared in his huge head. She placed her hand on the vein on Zhu Zhongba's wrist, confirming that the invisible needles and slave restriction spell were already in his internal brain, forming the brain domain restriction spell. Only then was she satisfied and released her hand. Chapter 13. Red Fruit of a Fat Pig. Zhu Zhongba started screaming, his face terrified. You evil woman! What did you do to me? Why can't I use my spiritual power? For a cultivator, for the cultivation base to become crippled, it's the same as becoming an ordinary person. Compared to death, it's a terrible torture. She ignored him. Rather, she took out a dagger and with a few quick swipes, cut his clothes into pieces. The courtyard gate had somehow opened without anyone noticing, allowing a cold wind to blow in. Zhu Zhongba's clothes fluttered in the breeze, slowly falling to the ground, leaving only worn-out, raggedy pants to still hang on his body, making him want to cover it, but he couldn't. Tsk tisk. She shook her head and sighed. I thought the clothes you were wearing were ugly enough. I didn't expect that when I removed your clothes you would be so ugly to the point of blinding people's eyes. To say you are fat pig, it's simply insulting to an actual pig. Lowly woman, you sure have the ability to attack this young master. Growing up, Zhu Zhongba had been raised with a gold spoon in his mouth. He had never received such a humiliation. Hysterically he roared, Lowly woman, I will dismember your body into 1,000 pieces. She contemptuously laughed. Based on your stupid appearance now, you still think you can dismember my body into 1,000 pieces? This great ant, is so afraid. You just wait. Wait until I'm saved. I absolutely will not let you off. Even if I have to chase after you till the end of the earth, I will kill you. Ha ha ha. All right, I will wait. She laughed. Just so you know, you don't need to chase after me till the end of the earth. I can tell you now, my name is Nalan Fei Shui, Nalan Manor's second miss, the genius Dr. Nalan Zhangzhe's daughter. You can just come and find me to settle this account. Nalan Fei Shui. Zhu Zhongba gnashed his teeth while loudly repeating this name, his eyes flashing red with thoughts of wanting to bite and crush her to death. I certainly will not let you off. She ignored his roaring. Following suit with what she had done to Zhu Zhongba, she stripped the 4 guards' clothes and tied them one by one to the pillar in the middle of the hall. For the items on Zhu Zhongba and the bodies of the 4 guards, including the precious storage ring on Zhu Zhongba's hand, she kindly accepted it all out of the goodness in her heart. Bang! Dash! With a loud echoing crash, she completely destroyed the courtyard's main gate, causing the scene in the hall to be plainly visible to people walking past. Every person in the courtyard was then hit by her, resulting with at least one day and one night that they couldn't even crawl to get up. To be believed that when tomorrow morning arrived, when the first strands of the sun's rays shined in here, there will certainly be many people who will see the world's best scene inside this house. Facing the pale silver moonlight, she spun around and rushed back to Zhu Zhongba in the middle of the hall, wearing a brilliant grin. You can show your ugly body in front of people, but your honor, don't forget to thank me later. Remember, my name is Nalan Fei Shui. Turning around, the smile on Hishi's face changed, twisting into something sinisterly dark and cold. Nalan's second miss, Nalan Fei Shui? He. Since you think Nalan Hishi blocked your path, if I didn't do something and just ignored your actions, wouldn't that be too sad for you? No one should scheme against her, she. After this, if they couldn't afford to pay the bitter price, like in her previous life. Now she was also holding this body's original, Nalan Hishi's, portion of karma. The quickly departing Hishi didn't know that after she left, about an incense stick worth of time, a shadow sprang from the courtyard, quickly rushing to the luxurious official residence nearby, next to Yinjing Imperial Palace. In the silence of the night, a man's laughter without restraint was suddenly heard from inside the official residence building. The man's laughter was deep and low. It resounded loudly, similar to a cello string being plucked, with layers of hidden depth that teased a person's heart. His laughter at this moment was filled with overflowing interest, really only grows more and more interesting. This king is impatient and wants to immediately meet her. The information that I asked you to investigate, have you received it yet? The information has just arrived, master. Please have a look. The man took the offered jade slip, one. With eyes full of curiosity, his expression slowly changing as he absorbed the information it stored. A one, jade slip, Yujian, a long, narrow strip of jade used as a magical item. A cultivator can magically store information inside it, and other cultivators can then use that jade slip to directly transmit the stored information into their minds. Based on the bamboo slips used in ancient China. Source from Immortal Mountain. WordPress. Com. Chapter 14. Abandoned Master and Wicked Slaves. Below the deserted Song Mountain, outside of Yinjing City, there is a small shabby courtyard. This was where Yinjing's famous doctor, Nalan Zhang's concubine-born third daughter lived. It was unknown to most that Nalan Hushi lived here. Song Mountain was located in a desolate area, where spiritual energy was thin. Birds and beasts rarely roamed in this area. Also, spiritual herbs and spiritual trees were unable to grow. Even ordinary fruits and crops were unable to survive in this environment. At this point, the time had passed Mao 1. The mountain wind blew frequently into the courtyard, bringing waves of gloomy chilliness. However, wet Nurse Qian still paced back and forth in the courtyard, occasionally glancing towards the shabby gate. Miss has been missing for more than a day. Why? Why is she still not back? Her gaze turned to the brightly lit main room. She couldn't help but finally walk over. The door opened a crack. From inside, a strong aroma of wine wafted out, accompanied by loud shouting and laughing. It had already passed midnight and reached early morning. However, in the main room, a group of slave servants were still joyfully gambling and drinking. Wet Nurse Qian carefully entered, panic written all over her face. Butlerly, Miss has not come back for a day and a night. I'm really worried about what has happened to her. Can you dispatch people to look for Miss? The room of boisterous people abruptly went quiet. I had been asking why my luck is so poor today. It turns out there's this bearer of ill luck come to touch my brows. Butlerly, who was sitting at the gambling table, fiercely kicked the stool beside him. An ominous glint flashed across his face. Your family Miss not coming back doesn't concern us. Maybe she has run away with a man? The people in the room burst into raucous laughter, with someone agreeing. I heard her mother seduced Dr. Nalan. She had such a thick face to become a concubine, as expected of such a mother to certainly have such a daughter. Her mother's like I. So her daughter would of course also act like her, right? You. Don't you dare talk rubbish. Wet Nurse Chin's face turned very red, her turbid eyes protruding in anger. I forbid you from slandering Madam and Miss. Ha ha ha, she's nothing more than lowly trash. She didn't even have the talent to cultivate. That she still dared to claim the title of a Miss. Don't make an exhibition of yourself for a disgrace. That's right. If it were not for Dr. Nayland being so charitable and having such a benevolent heart, how would he allow her to live here, even assigning so many people to serve her? Bah! I don't know where this illegitimate child came from, that's such useless trash, but the only choice left for her is to die. It's the wisest decision so as to not bring shame upon the Nayland family. As long as Nayland Hushi, that waste, really was dead, they would be able to return to the Nayland family. They wouldn't have to serve in this place that even bird shit wouldn't fall, where there wasn't any profit to make, and even their cultivation bases wouldn't advance. Shut up, you. Wet Nurse Chin's eyes shined scarlet, throwing herself towards several people. You. This group of evil slaves. Obviously Master sent you here to serve Mississippi. But now you're even occupying Miss Main house, causing Miss and I to live in the firewood room, making us no better than a pair of dogs. Her entire body gave off the aura of an insane person. In a moment that Butler Lee wasn't paying attention, he unexpectedly had a bunch of his hair pulled and he was grabbed by the neck. Startled by the sudden violence, he uttered a pained howl. Wet Nurse Chun was thinking that she would take them all down with her. She pulled his hair, scratching and grabbing whatever she could reach, shouting hysterically, "If Miss is dead, I'll die with all of you. Even if I have to crawl back to Nayland Manor, I will let Master know about your disgraceful behavior. I don't believe that Master Nayland doesn't really care about Miss life or death. Even if Miss was really abandoned, you, this group of wicked slaves that turned your backs on your owner, will not have a good end." Chapter 15. Wet Nurse Chin's despair inside the main room. The previous joyous and giggling atmosphere suddenly halted. The present scene causing the servants' faces to change, particularly that of a servant boy named Xiao Si. Butler Lee's hair had been grabbed and pulled until it was completely matted. His neck was marred with nail scratches that dripped blood, freezing him with shock before he reacted by fiercely kicking Wet Nurse Chin's abdomen. Butler Lee is a cultivator of the Qi refining stage 3rd layer. The foot he used to kick contained 100% of his strength. There was no way for the weak Wet Nurse Chin to resist, her body flying through the air like a bullet before it fell, heavily knocking against the corner of the table. Xiao Si, who always followed Butler Lee, stepped forward, ruthlessly stepping on the back of Wet Nurse Chin's hand, his face revealing a fierce expression. "We were kind enough to give you face, but clearly this half-dead old woman has no sense of shame. Who do you think you are that you actually dared to threaten us? If you are as obedient as a dog, like you were previously, maybe we will let you off. But now that your miss isn't here, you actually dared to be so brazen. Don't blame us then for being so merciless." Wet Nurse Chin raised her head as she endured the pain throughout her body, looking at the people surrounding her. Their eyes flickered fiercely with an ominous glint. Not one of them was surprised that the miss was missing. It actually seemed as if they were rejoicing at other people's misfortune, each showing an expression filled with evil intentions. These people must know the whereabouts of Miss. It seems like they're the ones who harmed Miss. Wet Nurse Chin's heart started to sink, and with difficulty she struggled to get up. Facing them heavily in a kowtow, "I beg you, tell me where Miss went. If you want me to compensate with this old life, I'm willing to do that. I'll work extremely hard for you in the future. So please, tell me where Miss is." Ha 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 ha. The servants encircling Wet Nurse Chin burst out in malicious laughter. Butler Lee laughed evilly, suddenly grabbing all the pie gao one on the table. He tossed them in front of Wet Nurse Chin. "If you swallow all of these, I'll tell you where your miss is." Wet Nurse Chin's complexion paled to a deathly white. There were several dozen tiles before her. She was simply unable to swallow them all. You group of beastly slags." Before she could even finish speaking, someone behind her ruthlessly kicked her, forcing her face to be knocked into the pile of tiles in front of her. "Butler Lee told you to eat it. Are you deaf?" Xiao Si fiercely stepped on her face with his foot, while someone else held up half of the palm-sized tiles, and stuffed them in her mouth. The room filled with the sound of sinister laughter. Woo woo woo! Wet Nurse Chin violently struggled, desperately shouting, You group of evil slaves, I will. Woo woo. We'll tell master. You killed Miss. Woo woo. This will not end well for you all. Standing in front of Wet Nurse Chun, enjoying the view, was Butler Lee and his confidant, Xiao Si. Glancing at each other, their eyes flashed with an ominous glint. None of the servants knew Nalan Hushy's whereabouts. They only knew someone in the Nalan family thought her unpleasant to the eyes, and that they wanted to teach her a lesson. But these two, only the two of them knew, that the trash that was Nalan Hushy would never come back. That person had promised that as long as they helped manage this matter well, making Nalan Hushy disappear secretly, that they will be allowed to be transferred back to the Nalan Manor. There they would be provided with generous cultivation resources. It seemed that this obscure old woman wouldn't remain quiet. Butler Lee sneered, leaned over, and with a sinister voice whispered, Since you are so loyal, and want so very much to see your miss, then I'll send you to go accompany your madam and miss. When you arrive in the underworld, you have to remember my achievements and meritorious behavior. Finished speaking, he slowly raised his head. Suddenly dropping it, he hit the top of Wet Nurse Chin's head hard. Wet Nurse Chin's desperation-filled eyes closed, her heart full of hate and hopelessness. She was powerless to do anything. 1. Dominoes used for gambling. Chapter 16. Person or Ghost. Wet Nurse Chin somewhat blankly opened her eyes when the expected pain didn't come, and saw Butler Lee's hand frozen in midair. His wrist and body were restrained by a thin rope. No. Rather than saying a rope, it would be better to say it was a whip. Or, more accurately, a white whip with a thin barb on the end. Butler Lee angrily turned his head. Damn. Who is it that doesn't have eyes and dared to attack me? Just as he was about to release spiritual power all over his body to break the whip, he suddenly felt a burst of mind-numbing pain, as if he would be ripped to pieces. Following the pain, his whole body unexpectedly soared into the air. Ah! Screams resonated throughout the courtyard. The servants in the room were stupefied by the scene before their eyes, frozen solid with shock. They stared blankly at the usually powerful Butler Lee, who now resembled a broken sack. After being tossed into the air, he was severely thrown to the ground. Crack, crack, dash, the sound came from Butler Lee's body, making the servants feel their blood run cold. That was the sound of all the bones in his body fracturing. Butler Lee's eyes suffused with white. From the corner of his mouth a trickle of blood started to flow, and in the blink of an eye, he stopped breathing and died. The complexion of all the servants paled. Shocked, they slowly looked towards the doorway. In the darkness outside, the slowly emerging figure of a little girl walked into the room. Ah! Xiao Si, the small servant boy that always followed closely at Butler Lee's side, issued a loud shout. How can it be? You! How can you come back? Why are you still able to come back? The other servants, though not so frightened like him, still expressed faces full of doubt and panic. The person before their eyes had pale skin and a petite stature, with a praiseworthy figure. Clearly this was the master of this courtyard, Nalan Hushy. But was this really Nalan Hushy? They always had the impression of the good-for-nothing third miss being petty and timid. How could she ever expose such a terrible expression? Even more frightening is that with only one blow she easily managed to overwhelm Butler Lee with her strength, breaking all the bones in his body, tragically killing him on the spot. That's right, after destroying the entire Zhu Manor, Hushy relied on the former's memory to return to the courtyard. She thought she had understood how miserable Nalan Hushy's situation was. However, when she saw that recent scene, only then did she fully realize how terrible the former Hushy's life had been. Nalan Hushy, along with the only one who had always cared about her, Wet Nurse Chun, had lived a life that was lower than a dog's. The miss had been driven away to the firewood room, while this group of evil slaves occupied the main house. Nalan Manor would also regularly send food and drink over, but that was completely stolen by the evil slaves who divided it amongst themselves. leaving only the leftovers for Nalan Hushi and wet Nurse Chun, which wasn't nearly enough to fill their stomachs. Even more unimaginable is that when their miss disappeared, this group of evil slaves didn't even worry. Instead, they wanted to kill wet Nurse Chun, who had always been by her side. Although sympathetic with Nalan Hushi's bitter experiences, she knew that people who didn't have the innate talent to cultivate in this world would not find it easy to survive. Hushi couldn't help but sigh. As a miss from a prosperous family, the former Nalan Hushi's days really were that of living like a dog. Step by step, Hushi slowly entered the main room. For every step she took, the servants would retreat a step, trembling with fear. Xiao Si, who collaborated with Butler Li, was so scared that his entire body was shaking. "You? Who are you?" His hurried retreat backwards caused him to stumble and fall to the ground, but still he desperately tried to crawl away. You're a ghost, right? You're the third Miss Ghost who's come for vengeance, right? No, dash. No, dash. Don't blame me. That matter was not my doing. I merely obeyed Butler Zhang's order. If you want to find someone to blame, just go find Second Miss and Butler Zhang. This matter and I do not have any relation. Chapter 17. Who disposes of who? Please let go of me, dash. Let me go. Hushi's eyebrows creased slightly, before suddenly taking out her whip and flicking her wrist. The whip made a graceful arc in the air, landing with a firm pressure on the small servant boy's body. Xiao Si felt severe pain spread throughout his body, causing his limbs to spasm. Without even managing to scream, he passed out into a dead faint. However, from this wicked slave's mouth, useful information could still be gained. The corner of Hushi's mouth lifted into a sinister grin. Therefore, for the time being, this person's life would be spared. The blood-stained wet Nurse Chen, who had been pushed to the ground and was covered with injuries, finally chose this moment to lift her head and look towards the origin of the commotion. Her dim eyes reflected Hushi's familiar figure, and in a flash, tears poured down her cheeks. "Miss, it's really Miss. I knew you wouldn't die. I knew. Madam would protect you." Hushi looked at wet Nurse Chun still collapsed on the ground. Her face was covered in tears and drying blood. Hushi's eyes flashed with a complicated light that quickly disappeared. She could hear in the way wet Nurse Chen spoke to Nalan Hushi, with such profound friendship and deep love, that she was a truly loyal servant. Her loyalty was so deep that she was even willing to die to avenge her miss, not willing to take even the slightest advantage of her disappearance to scheme. In the former Nalan Hushi's miserable memory, wet Nurse Chun had always taken care of her since she was a small child. She would rather starve and be exhausted than let her miss suffer an injustice or grievance. If she hadn't been there, Nalan Hushi wouldn't have been able to survive up until now. This kind of affection made her feel strange, as it was unfamiliar to her yet, at the same time, it also made her envious. The kind of person that pledged to defend and protect her. On her previous world there was also someone like that, but Hushi harshly exhaled and leaned over to prop up wet Nurse Chun. Next, Hushi raised wet Nurse Chen's head and gently pressed on several of her acupuncture points. Wet Nurse Chun had been feeling a piercing pain in her chest, like her heart was tearing, a sharp stabbing feeling around her lungs, and a difficulty to breathe, caused by the overwhelming sensation in her belly. Suddenly, she felt the pain almost vanish. Even her hands, that had originally been bleeding incessantly from multiple wounds, started to slow to a drip before stopping. Wet Nurse Chen lifted her head in surprise and saw Hushi standing before her, a cold, arrogant expression on her face. She suddenly felt dumbfounded. The mist before her eyes, even her appearance, seemed to have become entirely different. Hushi didn't explain anything to her. She just faintly chuckled. "Wet Nurse, please return to our room first. Wait until I settle affairs with them, then I'll help heal you." Settle affairs with them? Wet Nurse Chen's eyes opened wide, exclaiming, "Me? Miss, a few of them have cultivation bases at the Qi refining stage. How could you be their opponent?" Wet Nurse Chen's surprised cry suddenly made the surrounding people startle into action. Zhang San, who was amongst the remaining people, had the highest cultivation base. In recent years, he had reached the peak of the chi refining stage second layer. His intelligent pair of eyes could clearly see that, sure enough, Hushi was still trash that completely lacked spiritual power and a cultivation base. With this knowledge, Zhang San could feel his previous shock turn to rage. That they, cultivators of the chi refining stage, could actually be frightened until they spilt their guts. And by an ordinary person and trash that was unable to cultivate, to speak of it, it was so shameful that they wanted to die. As for how Butler Lee could be killed, it was certainly because he was attacked at a time he was unguarded. Zhang San fiercely glared at her. Third Miss is speaking so boldly today. We still don't know who will dispose of who. Let us teach you what is known as one's boundaries. Wet Nurse Chun became frightened, her complexion turning deathly pale. Without thinking, she stood in front of Hushi, blocking her from their view. Miss, you run away quickly. This wet nurse will stop them. You immediately go back to Nalan Manor and beg Master for help. Hushi stared, stunned, at Wet Nurse Chin's unflinching figure before her eyes. Even though her back was shivering, she still didn't step back. She that had originally dried up her emotions and frozen her heart could now feel a trace of warmth flowing. In this lifetime, there was actually still someone willing to disregard their life to protect her. Chapter 18. The Shame of Nalan Manor. Hushi placed a hand on Wet Nurse Chin's thin shoulder, her voice holding a rare trace of gentleness. Wet Nurse, don't be afraid. I can easily find methods to deal with them. Finished speaking, her cold gaze glared like a tiger watching her prey, her stare fixed towards the servants who crowded around. You all shouldn't forget that no matter what, I am your master. This kind of offense to your master. Were you not afraid of being punished by Nalan Manor's people? Ha 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 ha. The servants in the room all raised their heads and laughed loudly, their faces exuberant with their ridicule and gloating. Nalan Manor? Hee hee. I advise you not to indulge in wishful thinking. Who doesn't know your Nalan Manor's shame? You being alive is exactly what causes Nalan Manor to lose face. Maybe if you died, Master would then be able to be happy. Another person agreed. That's right. The Master and everyone else in the Nalan family all have awe-inspiring innate talent. Which one of them is not a famous young talent in the city of Yanjing? Then unfortunately out you come, this trash, to throw shade on Nalan Manor's face. No one even knows whether or not you are really Master's biological child. Maybe she's really an illegitimate child, who doesn't know her mother was famous for having the appearance of a fox. One. Who knows how many random men were tricked by her? Subsequently, the main room filled with uproarious laughter. Wet Nurse Chin was so angry that her entire body shook, resisting the urge to rush up and drag out these wicked servants that produced such evil tongues with all her might. However, Hushi didn't get angry in the slightest. Restraining Wet Nurse Chun, she faintly swept her eyes over several people. Oh, so that's to say that me secretly being sold off, the idea came from Nalan Manor? In the depth of Nalan Hushi's memory, there was a strong yearning hidden. A yearning for recognition from Nalan Manor, paired with a child's admiration towards Nalan Zhengze. Even throughout her childhood, though she was often bullied by Nalan Feishue, there was not even the slightest hint of hatred. Instead, she regarded her as a sister. Such a kind-hearted, weak little girl. Even if Nalan Manor had abandoned her, she could still tolerate it. Zhang San coldly snorted, disdain written across his face. If we received the order to directly kill you, there would of course be no harm in doing so. It's simply the goodness in our hearts that allowed you to find a way to survive. Moreover, for useless trash like you, being sold as a slave is already the best ending. The servants here didn't clearly know about the matter of Hushi being sold like Butler Zhang and Xiao Si, but they did know that something had happened to her. They just didn't care. Each one of them felt an implacable hatred towards Nalan Hushi. They all wished for her to disappear quickly, so that they could leave this desolate place and return to Nalan Manor. Nalan Hushi may be obstructing their return, but even then they wouldn't dare act blindly without thinking. She was still Nalan Manor's third miss after all. Now that someone in Nalan Manor wanted her to die, all of them would certainly be happy to see it happen. Zhang San retrieved a dagger from behind his back and slowly approached Hushi, since you didn't feel grateful and appreciate the kindness we gave you, instead coming back here to find death, then don't blame us for being ruthless. Brothers, all together." The words were barely out when the remaining 5 servants in the room joined him in attacking. Zhang San brandished the dagger that gave off a cold light, while the others gathered their spiritual powers in their palms as they attacked Hushi. Hushi sneered, her figure moving slightly as she gently pushed the screaming wet nurse Chen away from her. The long whip in her hand unraveled, fiercely whipping towards the 6 servants. "Ah!" Pained screams echoed throughout the room. "My hand! My hand!" In the blink of an eye, 3 people's wrist bones were neatly crushed. Their hands hung powerlessly as their palms mottled with vivid purples and greens. A1. Appearance of a fox. The fox spirit is an especially prolific shapeshifter, known variously as the Hulijing, fox spirit, in China. Although the specifics of the tales vary, these fox spirits can usually shape-shift, often taking the form of beautiful young women who attempt to seduce men, whether for mere mischief or to consume their bodies or spirits. Chapter 19. Let you off? It may be possible. Zhang San's hand that had been holding the dagger had his wrist completely fractured. Badly mutilated bones were exposed in his broken wrist. The remaining 3 people were scared stiff by the scene before their eyes, causing their complexions to turn deathly pale. Hushi once again waved her whip, and their screams filled the air as they fell hard to the ground. As Hushi looked down at the people rolling around in pain, the corner of her mouth lifted into a slight sneer. Based on these people's 3-legged cats, skills, they can in no way be compared with Zhu Zhongba's guards. She didn't even need to use her invisible needles. "Didn't you all say that you wanted to properly teach me?" She raised the whip, lightly slapping it to the ground, causing sparks to fly everywhere. "Didn't you all say that since I'm an illegitimate child, I'm courting death? Now that you've already spoken, in the end, who is courting death?" Hushi's whip slashed at Zhang San's body, causing him let out a sorrowful scream. "This kind of good-for-nothing trash? You dared to be so arrogant to your master? In the end, who gave you a dog's courage?" As if watching a group of dying ants, Hushi looked down at them with disdain. A faint purple light flickered in her cold black eyes, making them seem brighter. The 6 people on the ground trembled, so terrified that they didn't even dare scream. Zhang San first recovered. With difficulty, he used his uninjured hand to support himself on the ground. Climbing to his knees, his sorry figure crawled to Hushi's feet. "Miss, we know we've been wrong. I beg you to have mercy on us." "Miss, we received Butler Lee's order. Only then would we dare to attack you. But the matter of selling you, we really only just heard about it then. We were completely unaware. You're known to be generous. I beg you to spare us." Right. Everything was Butler Lee and his nephew, Li Si's doing. "Miss, we're all innocent." Hushi smiled with cold amusement while watching their performance, allowing them to kowtow for a while. Only then did she lazily say, "For me to let you off may be possible. However, how do I know you will not turn your heads again and frame me in the future? Maybe you'll try to sell me again?" Zhang San stared blankly, before quickly raising his uninjured left hand. Pointing to heaven to make an oath, "I, Zhang San, willingly swear that from now until afterwards to follow Mississippi. I will work extremely hard to serve Miss, never betraying her. If I were to ever disobey, let me be struck by heaven's thunder." The other 5 people naturally followed Zhang San's lead. Enduring their pain, they crawled towards Hushi, striving to be the first and fearing to be the last to swear. Wet Nurse Chun was stunned by the show before her eyes. She didn't expect her miss to be so ferocious after merely disappearing for a day. In her hands, the 6 cultivators of the Qi refining stage didn't have any ability to resist. However, even after hearing the 6 people's oath, she still felt worried. No one knew more clearly than her these servants' viciousness. How could it be possible for them to sincerely vow loyalty and devotion to Mississippi? Miss' natural disposition was kind-heartedness, but by all means she wouldn't believe them. Wet Nurse Chin anxiously wanted to warn her, however. Hushie had already leisurely sneered. All right, since you are so sincere, I'll give you a chance to turn over a new leaf. The 6 people heard what was said and immediately became ecstatic. Although when they lowered their eyes, a thread of ruthlessness swept past. Humph, loathsome lady, actually daring to punish them. Wait until they went to Nayland Manor to seek help, see if she could still be so cocky then. At that time, this loathsome girl must properly experience suffering. Every inch of the bones in her body would be broken, her hands and feet completely crippled. Have a taste of living while wanting to die. Miss, you can't believe them. Wet Nurse Chin exclaimed. T'one, three-legged cat, Sanjiameo. Three-legged cat is equivalent to jack of all trades and master of none in English. At first the word referred to a three-legged cat which was mistaken by people for a flying bear. Later the word indicated the cats which were skillful in hunting but had difficulty in walking. Gradually the word changed to mean being unprofessional when doing things. Chapter 20. Only puppets will not betray. The 6 people rejoiced in their hearts, maliciously imagining what will happen in the future. But they weren't going to find out, since, without anyone noticing, Hushie had already raised her left hand. 6 invisible needles lay between her slender fingertips. Her internal energy burst forth, propelling the needles to fly forward. In the blink of an eye, they entered the heads of the 6 peoples. The 6 people uttered a pained shout, feeling something cold drill into their brain. Zhangxin suddenly lifted up his head and looked at Hushie with fear. You? What did you do to us? Hushie's finger gently fiddled with the barbed whip, the corner of her mouth revealing the hint of a blood-thirsty smile. In this world, there's no oath that can be trusted. There are only soulless and mindless puppets that you could trust to never betray you. Well then, what do you think I'll do to you? You want to extract our souls from our body? Zhang San and the others' eyes filled with shock and fear, as well as a deep resentment towards Hushie. Loathsome girl, you will. The sharp pain in their brains spread in a flash. Eroding their brain's nerve, the 6 people desperately wanted to struggle and resist, but the control they had over their bodies had disappeared. The method Hushie used to create the puppets, naturally it wasn't the one of extracting souls that was usually used in this world. That was truly something that went against morals and the order of heaven. For the person that had their soul taken, not only was life as a puppet irreversible, they would also never be able to reincarnate. Hushie only needed to use the invisible needle to control their brain domain, then feed them some special medicines to make their consciousness vague, resulting in them only being able to listen and obey her orders. As long as Hushie was willing, the brain domain restriction spell could be removed, returning them to their normal state. Half an incense stick later, the 6 people that originally had sinister expressions had now become calm, their eyes lifeless and their faces expressionless. Hushie coldly gazed down at them as they crawled to kneel on the ground at her feet, respectfully kowtowing and saying as one, Master. Hushie then ordered them, remember, from now on, anything that happens in this small courtyard, you're not allowed to spread outside. That includes informing people from Nayland Manor. Yes, Master. In addition, if I'm not here, consider Wet Nurse Chun as your master. You have to make sure to carry out her orders. Did you all hear that clearly? The 6 people, as one, responded with a yes. Without a trace of rebellion, they paid their respects to Wet Nurse Chun and saluted her. Hushie waved a hand. Now all of you can withdraw. About Li Si, find him and guard him strictly, and don't let him die. In a while, I have something to ask him. After ordering them to withdraw, Hushie turned around, coming into contact with Wet Nurse Chin's shocked-filled watery eyes. Hushie held up Wet Nurse Chin's hand to feel her pulse, preparing to examine the condition of her injuries, but suddenly she stared blankly, confusion appearing on her face. Wet Nurse, was the meridian of your cultivation base forcibly destroyed by someone? Wet Nurse Chin's eyes suddenly opened wide with shock, her face expressing surprise and confusion. When her cultivation base had become crippled, Miss was simply too young to remember it happening. Moreover, to go through more than 10 years with eating only the dirty crops, her spiritual roots had long ago being destroyed, her dantian no better than an ordinary person's. Because that person had used a highly skilled method, common doctors couldn't treat it, not to mention that even the symptoms of the illness were invisible. In the beginning, she had held on to her hope of finding someone in the streets to cure her illness, but even the student that aided the doctor of Yanjing City's court was helpless. Since then she had given up, but why would Miss know about it and mention it now? Chapter 21. Bloom with a shining light. When wet nurse Chen recalls Hushy's behavior recently, she couldn't help but be shocked yet happy. Tears emerged from the corners of her eyes. Miss, can you cultivate now? In the end, where you go these 2 days? Did you suffer a lot of hardships? Wet nurse Chen's reaction made Hushy somewhat startled. Thinking of her sudden changes, would they make wet nurse Chen regard her as a strange person? Her expression slightly gentled. She considered for a moment what she could say about her past 2 days' experience. Wet nurse, you just need to remember, the previous Nalan Hushy has died. From now on, I'm not the trash that was always bullied and humiliated anymore. Anyone who dares to bully us, I will not let them off, even people from Nalan Manor. Although she didn't know if she was able to cultivate or not, but she, Hushy, will not undervalue herself. She would never willingly be useless trash. If she didn't have any qualifications to cultivate, she will find other ways to become strong. This old servant really is useless, to actually let Miss suffer. Wet nurse Chen's tears poured down her cheeks. She constantly wiped at her tears, saying with a trembling voice, but it's really good that Miss can now cultivate. Really good. I knew Miss is not trash. Madam had said before, there will be a day where you will bloom with a shining light. Certainly, Madam blessed and protected Miss. Woo woo. Miss, this wet nurse is very happy for you. Hushy's heart still has some doubts. Wet nurse had said, a day where Nalan Hushy will bloom with a shining light. What does that mean? Also, how could wet nurse Chun so easily accept her transformation? However, Hushy tossed this matter to the back of her mind, and instead focused on taking wet nurse Chen's pulse. Miss, you don't need to worry about this old servant. For me, this lowly life, this injury is simply nothing. I've long become accustomed to it. That Nalan Hushy never learned any medical techniques, how could wet nurse Chun not know that? Now it seems like Hushy was taking her pulse for half a day, her expression serious. Wet nurse Chun began to feel helpless, so she started to comfort her. If Miss doesn't feel assured, tomorrow I will go to the city to find a doctor to get some medicine. I'll certainly be fine. This wet nurse wants to see you become the brilliance of Jinling country and see you get married. Here, when poor civilians needed a doctor, they would all visit whatever traveling doctor was in the area. Hushy heard wet nurse Chin's words, and her heart felt touched. She gently placed wet nurse Chin's hand down, smiling shallowly. Wet nurse can rest assured. Your injury is not too serious. I can help you heal it. Wet nurse Chan thought Hushy was talking about finding a doctor to help treat her. She was unaware that Hushy had been accurately taking her pulse, planning which medicine ingredients to use, and what prescription would best treat her illness. All right, this old servant will believe Mississippi. Miss, you must be tired. It would be better to go to the East Wing, to get some rest. The East Wing was originally a place where Butler Li and his mistress lived. Zhang San had since been sent there to instruct the servants over there to move out. The courtyard that Nalan Manor had arranged for Nalan Hushy was ruined and desolate, to the point that a person would be at a loss to see it. But this East Wing that Butler Li had occupied, that can actually be considered well-arranged and exquisite. The bed that had been sorted out for Hushy was soft and comfortable. There were no valuable furnishings in the room, but that could be easily fixed. By the bedside, there was a fairly simple and elegant dressing table. Hushy had been feeling tired for a day since the former's body was particularly frail. Now that things had calmed down, she could feel pain throughout her body. Chapter 22. The upgraded space. The pain throughout Hushy's body was caused by old flogging injuries inflicted by servants from the courtyard, as well as general knocks and bumps. Combined with yearly malnutrition, it all piled up together. But now, Hushy refused to give in to this pain. She tightly closed the door and windows, confirmed that no one was around, then she quickly laid down on the bed. Her consciousness became vague, her soul seeming like it was pulled from her body. After opening her eyes again, her consciousness had entered her space. This space had accompanied Hushi for more than 10 years. The furnishings inside this space, just by closing her eyes, she can remember it all. It couldn't be more familiar to her. But the scene that was reflected into her eyes surprised her. This is still the space in her memory, right? In her previous life, this space was a wasteland. Even the air permeated a deathly smell. It's different from the descriptions used in the popular web novels in her previous life. The land inside the space, all was sand and gravel. It couldn't be used to cultivate. No living thing could be brought into the space, including Hushi herself. She could only use her consciousness to enter, leaving her physical body to sleep on the outside. In the middle of the land there was a palace called Shumi Palace. Hushi had been bored on several occasions and had explored, finding that there were 81 rooms altogether in the palace. However, in Hushi's previous life, these damn rooms, even after she had used countless methods, not even one room could be opened. The only thing in the space that could maybe be considered a treasure was the expanse of spring water in front of the palace. It possessed a healing effect, helping to heal all sorts of injuries and even improving eyesight. Another example is that it can help people to heal bone deep cuts and muscle injuries, speeding up the healing process with a better result than if healed normally. Therefore, in her previous life, Hushi had regarded this space as a moving warehouse and made use of it as her medicine deploy room. However, the space before her eyes and the space in her memory were completely different, making Hushi doubt whether or not she had entered the wrong place. The land that had originally been filled with sand and stones had been replaced by peculiar black land. The air was no longer permeated with a deathly smell. Rather, it had a clean air. The pure spirit in the air could make a person's body and heart entirely intoxicated. The cells in her body felt energized, greedily absorbing the air in here. Originally, her entire body that had been filled with pain and weakness was now unconsciously replaced with a relaxed feeling. Hushi took a deep breath. Squatting down, she gently grabbed a handful of black soil and brought it to her nose to smell. Although not an expert in planting and growing medicinal herbs, even she can tell that this black soil obviously contains strong nutrients and spiritual energy. It couldn't even be compared to the previous sand and stones. How can the space change so much? Hushi released the black soil in her hand, a burst of indescribable excitement forming. Could it be that because of the explosion in her previous life, her space upgraded? Another time, she would have to bring some seeds to test this black soil. How fertile the black soil was and how well a spiritual plant would grow. It would be very interesting to see the results. Hushi walked forward happily, heading to the place she had previously used as a storage room. Sure enough, as per her expectation, all the stored medicine from her previous life was destroyed. All those bottles and jars had disappeared from the explosion, including the bottle of cursed poison, which needed only one drop to be able to destroy an entire city, dash the lure. But some things still remained, such as the invisible needles, also some properties used for her disguises in her previous life. Hushi bent down, scooping some water with her hand from the spirit spring to drink. But once the water from the spirit spring was swallowed, she suddenly felt an overwhelming sensation rising from her stomach. Clearly visible to the naked eye, a stinky black grease spilled forth from her entire body. Hushi was greatly shocked. Previously, when she would drink this spring water, it would relieve her fatigue and nourish her internal organs. How can it be possible for the result to be so different this time? Chapter 23. The tragedy of beauty. Such a change lasted for a few minutes, resulting in Hushi's entire body being covered by the dirty black grease. Her body issued a nausea-inducing stench. However, where she had originally felt pain and weakness of the internal organs, on the contrary, she now felt relaxed. Hushi quickly stripped and, using the spirit spring water, she washed away the filth on her body and clothes. Once she was clean, she felt refreshed, her whole body full of strength, like she had been reborn. Could it be that not only this space upgraded, but even the spirit spring upgraded? Like in a legend, the spirit water would not only heal injuries, it would now even remove impurities within the body. Hushi was overjoyed at this turn of events. After dressing in her still slightly damp clothes, she was stunned when she accidentally saw her reflection in the spring water. In her previous life, Hushi could be regarded as a beautiful woman, but compared now with the little girl in the spring water, it is simply the difference between dog-tail grass and a flower. The ripple in the clear spring water reflected the little girl's tender and snow-white skin. A pair of ink-like phoenix eyes slowly opened. They were not charming and flirtatious. Rather, they were like the darkness under the starry sky. A vast, resplendent expanse. The red lips were no longer chapped and cracked. Instead, they were like peach blossom petals, glossy and delicate. The upper lip was slightly raised, as if in silent invitation. Hushi touched her face in shock, the spring water reflecting the little girl also touching her face. Two long, delicately curved, shapely eyebrows wrinkled in confusion, like a budding flower that attracted tender affection. There are words that describe an ancient beauty. Hands are like soft weeds, skin is like congealed fat, a neck like longhorn beetle larvae, tooth is gored sharp. With one look can overturn a city, a second can overturn a country. Every word and every sentence now resembled her born-again self. Heavens! This is Nalan Hushi's true face? Hushi opened her eyes wide. She felt her brain has been too confused and was about to crash. This? Where did the saltless, ugly woman go? This was simply a beautiful woman that was capable of causing the downfall of a city or country. How depraved was the Nalan family to actually torture this beautiful woman until she looked malnourished and sickly, reducing her to an unremarkable appearance. Hushi took a deep breath and, looking at the reflection of the stunning beauty in the spring water, she couldn't help but frown. Maybe she was here to express her gratitude towards all the people who tortured her. Otherwise, Nalan Hushi's memories would not have come to Hushi the moment she received her body. In her memory, although the next generation in the Nalan family all looked handsome and beautiful, there was definitely not a beauty with such a tragic life. If Nalan Hushi were to go out with this appearance, it would not only cause a sensation, but disaster. Nalan Manor thought of her as an illegitimate child and hadn't moved to help her previously, leaving her to suffer like a pig in a cage. With her past appearance making many people fight over her to become their furnace, with her now being like this, if she were to just go out, many more people would fight over her. With this thought, Hushi made a prompt decision, picking up the disguise kit that she had earlier placed beside the spring water and applying it on her face. Needless to say, Nalan Hushi's face is definitely a source of calamity. Currently, she didn't have the strength to defend herself if her appearance were to be exposed in front of people, and she absolutely did not want to attract disaster. In a short time, and with a little effort, Hushi completed her disguise. She bent down and studied her reflection in the spring water, now an ordinary and pale appearance, once again resembling the previous Nalan Hushi. Well done. Hushi flicked her finger, feeling her mood become good. As a woman, she was pleased with her appearance. Who wants to become ugly? Besides her space being upgraded and her changed appearance, she also found out that after she had drunk the spring water, her internal energy has been fully recovered. Chapter 24. Such an evildoer. Moreover, although she was still unable to absorb spiritual energy, she could assimilate the spiritual energy in her space. When Hushi felt the spiritual energy enter and circulate in her body, she could feel her mind becoming energized, any remaining traces of tiredness disappearing. Hushi, standing next to the spring, started drying her clothes using her internal energy. Suddenly, the reflection in the water flashed. Before, her figure had been reflected in the water. Now, the surface of the water reflected the vague silhouette of a person. There was now a shadow quietly hiding behind the beams in her room. There was no light in the room, so she was unable to clearly make out the appearance of the shadow. She could only tell it was a tall man. At the same time, every corner of her space lit up with a red light in warning. Someone had approached within 100 meters. Moreover, that person was now inside her room. This space had an alert function. If someone were to approach her sleeping physical body, the space will notice and sound an alarm. The situation outside will be reflected on the water in order to avoid her physical body being harmed while she was in her space. Hushy's eyes flashed. Quickly leaving her space, she returned to her physical body. Once she exited her space, she jolted in surprise, receiving such a shock she almost jumped up. The room was dark and quiet, empty except for herself. Her senses couldn't detect the presence of anyone else in the room. However, at this very moment, there is a hand gently caressing her closed eyelids. Slowly, that hand traveled to the collar of her clothes. That's right, someone was standing beside her silently. Then, without hesitation, those nimble fingers began to untie her outer robes. Hushy suddenly opened her eyes, her cold eyes shining with a killing intent. As fast as lightning, her left foot ruthlessly aimed a kick at that daring flower thief. However, the expected cracking sound of her foot landing on the thief's chest didn't happen. Instead, a big hand grabbed her ankle, like an iron claw. The palm of the hand was warm and dry, instantly raising her temperature as his fingertips brushed across her naked leg, making her shudder. Hushy's heart shivered and she moved her body in a flash. Rising from the bed, her right foot kicked at that person. Her hands moved in a dance, like the opening of a flower. A lotus flower blossom, layer upon layer of killing intent surrounded her. A surprised voice lightly sounded. The palm that held her ankle released her, and she fell back several steps to the sound of low laughter. This is a man. Moreover, it was a man with a deep, attractive voice. Hushy stood barefoot in the dark, her heart bewildered while her eyes coldly glared at the shadow in front of her. Even though this man was clearly standing in front of her and laughing, she was still unable to sense any of his movements. If it wasn't for her space warning her, she might never have known anyone was there, even if she was being skinned to the bone by this man. Who was this man? Why did he approach her in the middle of the night? And what was his purpose? Hushy's eyebrows wrinkled slightly while studying the motionless man in front of her. Suddenly, her hand shot forward, reaching in the direction of a candlestick holder. She had barely heard a laugh before the unlit candle on the dressing table suddenly lit up, illuminating the room and revealing the man's appearance. A light flashed in Hushy's eyes. Her mind suddenly felt stunned, like she had inhaled a breath of icy cold air. In this world, there was actually such an evildoer. The man's appearance was that of a man no older than 20 years old. Dressed in black with narrow sleeves, the collar of his outer clothes were decorated with silver and purple embroidery, mixed with dark, threaded marked-out patterns of magic clouds and bats. A wide belt of the same color rested on his waist. His stature was tall, straight, and slender, like a stern young bamboo shoot. His entire person emitted a one-of-a-kind aura, a heavenly nature with a luxurious atmosphere. Chapter 25. Beautiful enough to make me want to covet them. What was most stunning about that handsome face was the faint light surrounding him. It highlighted his youthful and elegant features. His eyes were deep and distant, containing a mix of a refined youngster and a youth with evil charm. Like a well-carved jade, the luster it gave off charmed people heart and soul. In her previous life, Hushy had seen countless handsome celebrities. Even Langya, who betrayed her, was famous as a handsome man. But if those men were placed next to this man, it would be like comparing the light of a firefly to a bright moon, stone to fine jade. They couldn't be mentioned on equal terms. Hushy was momentarily stunned. Then she went on full alert. With a cold voice she asked, "Who are you? What do you want, breaking into my room in the middle of the night?" The corner of the black-clothed man's mouth lifted. His elegant face with a smile was even more attractive. His deep voice replied languidly, "It's a dark and stormy night. A man and a woman alone together. What do you say I want to do?" The veins on Hushy's forehead became visible, her eyes frosty. She couldn't help but sneer. "Based on your beautiful appearance, the young ladies from Yanjing City might be lined up from east to west wanting to be together with you, like a raging fire and dry wood. Maybe your brain has been displaced, coming here to be a two-bit flower thief." Beautiful appearance? Two-bit? Flower thief? The mouth of the black-clothed man slightly tipped down. This little girl's courage was not small. Perhaps in all of Yinjing City, there was no other person who dared to talk to him like this. With only the candlelight illuminating the dark room, the little girl's eyes shone brilliantly, containing a frostiness as peaceful as clear water in a deep well. They rendered his anger useless, instead rousing his interest and curiosity. The man leisurely stepped forward, his tall figure shrouding Hushi in shadows, pointed-toothed and sharp-tongued. What a ruthless little girl. Since you were able to play properly with young Master Zhu's family guards, and was able to detect this king's presence, you really are worthy of being the second miss of the Nailin family, Nailin Feishue, wasn't it? Or perhaps I should call you Nailin Hushi? When the two words Nailin Hushi were spoken, the man's voice was deep and low, his eyes sharp, like an eagle watching his prey, not giving her the chance to escape. Hushi startled, subconsciously taking a step back, her heart surging with shock and annoyance. So it turns out it's actually like this. This man appeared here because she was at Gluttonous House, and Zhu Manor's abnormal behavior had attracted his attention. No, maybe it was because of her own actions that she has been followed by this man. This realization made Hushi's mood drop. She had stayed in Zhu Manor for so long, but she hadn't sensed that someone had been watching her. Moreover, if it wasn't for her space warning her, even if this man had touched her body, she might never have realized it. Damn it. In the end, her abilities were much weaker when compared to a powerful cultivator. Her hands trembled slightly, the invisible needles already pressed against her fingertips, a purple light glimmering and shifting in her pitch-black eyes. Her voice was like a sharp blade. Speak. You followed me all the way here. What do you want? The man was mesmerized looking at her eyes, taking a step forward. Without thought, he held her chin and whispered, "Have people told you that you have a beautiful pair of eyes? Beautiful enough to make me want to covet them. Taking them home would make for a good collection." This perverted man, dash. Chapter 26. You're seducing me, Hushi was cursing in her heart, while on the contrary, a sneer was plastered on her face. That would depend on whether you have the ability to or not. As soon as she finished speaking, her figure flashed as she struggled free from the man's hold, reappearing 1 meter away. Her hands flipped over, and with a burst of speed, invisible needles ruthlessly shot towards the man in front of her. However, Hushi's expectations of the man getting shot and turning into a hedgehog were let down. The invisible needles flew towards the black-clothed man like lightning, scarcely leaving a shadow. But within 3 inches from his face, the needles stopped, motionless. It was like a magic spell surrounded his body. The man leisurely extended his slender fingers, exuding confidence and elegance. He pinched a small needle. He studied the silver needle in his hand, feeling a cold sensation transmitted from his fingertips throughout his body. This needle is somewhat interesting. It's made using 1,000-year black ice. Oh, it also seems to contain a certain amount of spiritual power. Therefore, it would be able to injure an early-stage cultivator of Qi refining stage and foundation establishment stage. But these small toys of yours are useless on me. The man's fingers lightly pinched, and his slender hands, which resembled jade, the bone joints clearly distinct, crushed the invisible needles into dust, leaving it to scatter in the air without a trace. Hushi's expression turned ugly. In the next moment, she became aware of the flower in front of her. The man that had until recently been standing at a distance from her suddenly appeared in front of her, capturing her wrist. Her expression changing, Hushi's body flipped into the air, her agility similar to a cat as she broke free from his hold. However, the black-clothed man's movements were even more nimble compared to hers. His long arms stretched, and hooking 2 fingers in her belt, he pulled her back into his embrace. How was it? Do my skills please you? Completely unable to move, his warm breath tickled Hushi's ear. Her body was pressed firmly against his sturdy chest, restraining her right hand that held more invisible needles at her back. Hushi's face flushed red due to her anger. Filled with fury, she loudly shouted, "Let go!" However, her struggling only caused their bodies to touch even closer. The man's eyes that originally shined with a teasing light turned somewhat dark because of this constant friction. He leaned closer, his breathing speeding up, and whispered with a fake smile, "Little girl, if you move again, I will regard it as you seducing me." Before he had finished his implication, his handsome face filled with demonic charm suddenly sank. He flexed his empty hand and inclined his head towards his shoulder. There, sticking out, was an ordinary silver hairpin. The hairpin had pierced his clothes and penetrated into his flesh, causing a bright red liquid to soak his black clothes. The man slowly raised his head. His pair of clear eyes narrowed dangerously as his gaze landed on the coldly smiling girl not far from him. This little girl had dared to injure him. Without using a cultivation base and only relying on martial arts, in this entire Jinling country, only a few had ever managed to injure him. Now, the hands of this little girl, completely lacking any cultivation base, had injured him. With bare feet, Hushi stepped on the bed, the sleeves of her clothes fluttering in an invisible breeze. Her pale, small face revealed a cruel, untamed expression. "Based on your skills? If you want to make me pleased, do it in the next life." However, in the next moment, Hushi's complexion suddenly changed. A strong pressure, similar to that of a huge gale, swept over her, making her feel as if she was being crushed by a giant hand. Her 5 viscera and 6 bowels were in so much pain, it was difficult to withstand the pressure. The red flush on her face quickly receded, her body trembling. She was unable to bear it and spit out a mouthful of blood. This type of coercion belongs to a high-level martial artist. In front of this kind of power pressure, Hushi felt herself to be a tiny individual with no power. At any time, she could be crushed and turned into ash. Chapter 27. The good-for-nothing may also be a genius. Taking a few steps towards Hushi, he grasped her hand with a smile, and like a lover he gently caressed her. "This is the hand that injured me? Do you know what happens to people who dare to injure me?" Hushi slowly calmed her breathing, the pain in her internal organs making her face turn as pale as paper. With a heated gaze, the man clutched her small and weak hand, her delicate skin indirectly caressing the pointed cocoon on his belly, making her shudder and a numbness to spread up her arm. Hushi lightly twisted her wrist to try and break the man's hold. However, he pulled her forward, dragging her to fall on his chest. "Not long ago, there was a woman who acted self-righteous in order to attract me. In a public place, surrounded by a crowd, she dared to point a sword at me." His low voice held a dangerous demonic charm. Slowly he exhaled in her ear, "Little girl, you tell me, should I destroy your hands or the meridians in your body? If you want to destroy it, then just destroy it. Why are you talking so much? Do you think I will beg you?" Hushi looked up at him and sneered. Her expression was dark, but her eyes were bright with stars, stubborn and icily arrogant, unflinching, staring back. The man's heart faintly stirred, as if her pair of eyes were leaving a mark at the bottom of his heart. His heart, that has always been calm and cold like a lake, felt an indescribable ripple appear. He couldn't help but laugh, removing the power pressuring her body. His voice contained a trace of helplessness. "You are still young, but why are you so stubborn?" Hushi frowned, just about to retort, when she suddenly felt a thread of pure essence enter a vein in her detained wrist, spreading throughout her entire body in a flash. The cool energy wave replaced the previous oppressive power, traveling rapidly in her body to her dantian. The pain in her internal organs, that had felt as if they were being ripped apart, disappeared without a trace, replaced with a comfortable and relaxed feeling. "What are you doing?" She was surprised. Could it be that this person was now healing her? However, the man responded with an astonished expression. Tightening his grip on Hushi's wrist, his expression turned uncertain. It was quite a while before he spoke. "I had heard that Nalan family's third miss, Nalan Hushi, was diagnosed as a child as trash that couldn't cultivate. Therefore she was abandoned at this place, where there is only thin spiritual energy. Are you really that rumored trash, Nalan Hushi?" Hushi's heart was bewildered, and with her expression showing a calmness she didn't feel, indifferently replied, "Didn't you already thoroughly investigate my background before following me here? Besides, if I'm not Nalan Hushi, then who am I?" "Humph. This body is definitely Nalan Hushi's. This world doesn't have a precedent for rebirth, so as long as she doesn't admit it, no one can say that she's not nailing Hushi. The man laughed, his voice filled with interest. Hee, the good trash that can't cultivate. This world has so many blind people. Hushi was startled, repeatedly questioning, "What do you mean?" Her small face that was originally calm, at this moment slightly changed. The man's hot palm suddenly gripped her lower jaw. Leaning over, he stared at her pair of clear and bright phoenix eyes. "Nailin' Hushi, is it? I'll remember you now. We will meet again soon." "Who are you actually?" Just as Hushi's cold and sharp question was asked, she felt a gust of air brush past her. The man that had been standing in front of her had now disappeared without a trace. The candlelight flickered gently in the room, but there was only her, standing all alone, as if that strange man had merely been an illusion. "That bastard, Dash!" she cursed in her heart, gnashing her teeth while laying back down on the bed, entering her space again. Chapter 28 Mother. Inside, Hushi's space was still the same as before. A strong and pure spirit permeated the air, and the large area of black land, although without any plants, was still filled with a nurturing vitality and exuberance. However, she was not here to focus on the land and spirit spring this time. When she had exited her space before, she had glanced at Shumi Palace, noticing that the first door was open. One must know, she had possessed this space for more than 10 years, and had explored this Shumi Palace more than 1,000 times. Ice, fire, dynamite, and all the other methods she could think of, and not one door could be opened. Not even a mark was left behind. Hushi quickly walked to the front of Shumi Palace. In surprise, she looked at the half-closed door, seeing a trace of golden light spilling out. The first door of Shumi Palace had really opened. Becoming excited, her heart beat wildly and incessantly. Hushi had barely entered the room, when inside her head there was a tinkling sound, and an odd message appeared in her mind. "Shumi Mustard Seed has been activated. Shumi Palace's Jade Heaven door has been opened, including 9th Secluded Spirit Spring and Ancient Rhyme Spirit Field. The 9th Secluded Spirit Spring, able to replenish spiritual energy, purify essence, and heal deep wounds. Also used for a medicament to advance to peak form, and a medicament to induce childbirth. The Ancient Rhyme Spirit Field, able to shorten a plant's growth by hundreds of times, and the soil will sustain spiritual plants without the need for water." Sure enough, her space had upgraded. Moreover, the black soil outside the palace really was very beneficial to growing spiritual plants. But this 9th Secluded Spirit Spring, the so-called advancing medicament and labor-inducing medicament, what did those mean? The script slowly faded from her mind, leaving her with a smiling expression showing on her face. Now her attention was quickly attracted by the huge egg in the middle of the room. That's right, in the middle of this Shumi Palace's first room, hanging in the air, there was a huge egg-shaped object. From the egg a faint golden luster was emitted, and through the thin shell, a creature with a curled body could vaguely be seen floating quietly inside. At first glance, this huge egg reminded Hushi of the pregnant women in her previous life, when they would have a 4-dimensional ultrasound. She had a strong intuition that the creature inside the egg was alive. But that behind the Jade Heaven door the room was empty except for a huge, unknown egg. This was too beyond her expectations. Hushi lightly stepped forward, slowly approaching the egg and circling around it, a faint fragrance like warm bread reaching her nose. She was astonished as she felt an intimate feeling that she had never felt before suddenly surge up from the bottom of her heart, as if the creature and her were connected by blood. Her ears could even hear the thud-thud of the young creature's pulse. With a bewildered expression, Hushi slowly extended her hand, gently caressing the smooth surface of the huge egg. "Mother, mother," a sharp and clear immature young child's voice suddenly echoed inside her head, causing her to jump in shock. Quickly withdrawing her hand, she looked in bewilderment at the huge egg. The golden light surrounding it had become brighter. Just now, was that her imagination? Why did it seem like she heard a child speaking? But this room is empty. She didn't see even a shadow of anyone else. It couldn't be. That this huge egg was talking to her? Hushy's heart was full of disbelief, not daring to believe, as she once again extended her hand, touching the huge egg that was now flickering with golden light, as if in excitement. Mother, you finally came to see me. If you had not come, baby would have been bored to death inside here. Chapter 29. What species are you? Hushy's eyes opened wide. She was quiet for a while before finally asking, Who are you calling mother? Of course it's you, mother. The huge egg's voice was brimming with happiness like a spoiled child. Besides the unequaled great, awesome, and beautiful mother, who else would have the qualifications to become baby's mother? Black lines appeared on Hushy's face. She didn't know whether to laugh or cry. Who's qualified to become your mother? This miss is only 16. Even in my past life I hadn't passed 20, so how can I become a mother? This is wrong. This is an egg and I am a human. For a viviparous mammal, how can I give birth to such a huge egg like this? Hushy felt dizzy because of this egg, and speaking with an unhappy voice, What are you? Why are you calling me mother? Because you are my mother? The golden light bounced several times, its voice somewhat anxious. Mother, I can often see you from here. I've been waiting for you to come see me, but you've never come. Baby is very lonely and all alone here. The huge egg's sharp and clear child voice was sad, and sobbing could be heard coming from the egg. It was so sorrowful and full of grievances, it really made an unfeeling person unable to not take pity. Hushy felt a headache start, but unable to help herself, she gently stroked and caressed the huge egg's shell, and spoke with a soft voice, all right, don't cry. Haven't I come to see you now? What type of species are you? What is species? The huge egg seemingly really liked her touch. The originally still crying voice had now become cheerful. I don't know what I am. But, mother is my mother. Baby knew you. Woo, mother. You don't need baby? After speaking, the huge egg seemed to panic and became restless, once again beginning to sob. Hushy held her forehead when she heard the child's grief-filled weeping. She was filled with self-mocking as she didn't know how to describe her feelings of wanting to surge forward and comfort the egg. She is an unmarried girl. She really didn't have any experience on how to coax a child. To stop it from weeping, Hushy had no choice but to caress its eggshell again. All right, don't cry. I never said I don't want you. Then, do you know why you're in Shumi Palace? The huge egg accepted the caresses and sure enough, once again the overcast rain became clear, its excited golden light bobbing around almost in a circle. It even shouted mother several times, and as if trying to remember something, Shumi Palace? It seems I remember this name, Shumi Palace. Ah, that's right. It's Grandpa Shumi. I remember him. It's him that had saved baby? Grandpa Shumi? Who is he? Grandpa Shumi. Its voice was confused, yet filled with yearning and fondness. Grandpa Shumi was good towards baby. He saved baby from that dark, ice-cold room, also feeding baby rich spiritual energy to drink. After baby drank spiritual energy, I fell asleep. After waking up, I then saw you, mother. Hushy was dumbfounded towards this huge egg. It was crying one minute, then laughing the next moment. From the short conversation they had, she could see it had a child's temperament, and she didn't understand most of what it said. So even if she asked again, it might not answer anything. Hushy felt helpless. She intended to release her hand that was still pressed against the eggshell, when suddenly, she heard the child's voice excitedly shout, That's right. Grandpa Shumi has something that he wanted to hand over to mother. Baby was too happy to see you, almost forgetting about it. Chapter 30. Old Man Shumi. Hushy had just finished speaking when the huge egg's golden light suddenly bounced a bit before a silver light separated from it, stopping to sway in front of Hushy. She momentarily stared blankly, but not waiting for her to clearly ask what this light was to the huge egg. The silver-colored light suddenly accelerated its speed, entering her body. Hushy staggered back several steps, her hand releasing the egg as she felt the internal energy in her body running rampant. After several breaths, she realized she wasn't in any pain or discomfort. On the contrary, before her eyes the translucent silhouette of a person slowly condensed. It was a sage-like old man dressed in a white robe, with his silver hair and beard. The corners of his mouth held traces of an amiable and benevolent smile. However, when Hushi saw this man, she felt a burst of uncomfortableness throughout her body. Her invisible needles instinctively appeared between her 5 fingers. Even if this old man had a benevolent and harmless expression, his body emitted such force that it made her feel powerless. His force was so strong that even crawling was difficult. His muddy eyes contained an unlimited serene light. Just like a bottomless abyss, the end couldn't be seen. Grandpa Shumi. The huge egg uttered a cry of excitement, but this time the young child's voice didn't come from inside the eggshell. Instead it echoed in her ears, that silvery ball of light being the obvious reason why. Mother, mother, you quickly see. That is Grandpa Shumi that had saved baby. However, Hushi was not so naive as the huge egg. Rather, she cautiously looked at the old man that was floating in the air, slowly asking, "Are you a person or a ghost? What is this place, Shumi Palace?" Unknowingly, she spoke her fears, because although Shumi's space had accompanied her for 2 lives, if she wasn't clear on what it actually was, she would never feel completely comfortable using it. Old man Shumi didn't answer. Instead, he seemed shocked as his eyes stared at Hushi. Happiness, bewilderment, relief, hope, expressions lit up his eyes as one by one they flashed past. Hushi couldn't stand this type of silent oppression and chose to throw her invisible needles, prompting old man Shumi to finally speak. "I've been waiting in this Shumi mustard seed space for a long time. I thought that there was no hope anymore. I didn't expect that I was actually waiting." His face was filled with excitement as he looked at Hushi. His gaze stared at Hushi like she was a rare treasure, like his life's saver. That's right. It's soul fusion. I didn't expect that a spirit from a different world would really achieve soul fusion. Ha 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 ha. Our clan has been saved now. When this was said, Hushi was scared witless. With this one sentence about a spirit from a different world, it was very obvious that old man Shumi had seen through to her true identity. Hushi's expression was filled with caution and alertness. It caused old man Shumi to calm his excitement and show a warm, cultured smile. "Good child. You don't need to be afraid. Besides, I will not be able to see through to your true identity. Especially after you've completely broken the seal. This ability will be fused together with your body, without a trace of flaws." Hushi frowned and muttered, "After breaking the seal?" She didn't know why, but the first thing she recalled is that intruder in the middle of the night, that hateful man's words, "If you are trash, then no one in this world is a genius." Could it be that what that man said is true, that there was some ability sealed away within her body? Hushi was deep in thought when she heard old man Shumi's slightly quickened voice. "Good child, now you listen to me. I don't have much time." Don't have much time? At this moment her thoughts slowed, unconsciously repeating those words. You're tuning in to the Romance Rendezvous YouTube channel. We're so grateful for your support, and don't forget to subscribe to join us on this incredible journey through captivating stories. Your generosity through donations truly makes a world of difference, as it's the primary source of revenue that allows me to expand and enhance this channel for you. Thank you from the bottom of my heart for being a part of this adventure.